Hello everyone, and welcome back to Paranormal M. Tonight's video has a few strange experiences from different people, and the first one begins in 2006, when Sarah came home from college, looking confused and not quite like herself. She didn't remember how she got there, and soon her family realized something was seriously wrong. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, and if these stories help you relax or fall asleep, share them with someone who might need that too. Alright, let's get into the first story. I hope you enjoy listening and sleep well tonight. Hey there, I want to share with you some stories, some personal, some from people I know, that all revolve around strange, unexplained experiences. Each one has its own eerie vibe, and I promise to take you through every detail, every shiver-inducing moment, just like I remember it or heard it. So, grab a cup of something warm and let's dive in. Let's start with a tale from back in 2006 in Patna, India. I had this cousin, let's call her Sarah. She was the kind of person who'd light up any room, always cheerful, respectful, and just so kind-hearted. She had moved to Bangalore for engineering college, which was quite a distance from home, about 1,500 kilometers. One day, the doorbell rang, and I went to open it, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor. But there she was, Sarah, standing there with this solemn, almost haunted look in her eyes. We all welcomed her in, asking about her journey, but she seemed confused, almost blank, about how she had gotten home. We later found out she had flown back on a plane, but she claimed she had no memory of that at all. Over the next 6 months, life became a nightmare for her and for us. Sarah started showing signs of deep depression. She stopped talking, barely ate, and sometimes her body would heat up with fever-like symptoms, accompanied by screams that tore through the night air. At night, she'd suddenly burst into maniacal laughter, or sometimes she would wail, pulling her hair out in despair. If anyone tried to comfort her, she'd lash out with a guttural, animalistic voice that was so unlike her, it terrified us all. My older sister, who's a psychiatrist, stepped in and diagnosed her with depression caused by low self-esteem issues in college. She started medication, faithfully for 6 months. But nothing changed. Sarah's parents reached a breaking point, desperate for answers or any relief. They sought out a master tantric, a practitioner of the occult, someone purported to be clairvoyant and skilled in spiritual matters. When he entered our home, Sarah's reaction was immediate and intense. She screamed and wailed as if he were the source of her torment. The tantric calmly looked at her and said he'd return to perform an exorcism ritual. He instructed us to keep Sarah inside during this time. Exactly 3 hours later, Sarah began screaming again, this time trying to escape the house. It took 5 of the men in our family to hold her down on the bed. She even tried to leap from a window. Her screams drew the entire neighborhood, who gathered outside, wide-eyed and whispering. After about an hour of this chaos, she suddenly fell silent and slept soundly for 6 hours. When she woke, she was calm and asked why she was at home and not in her college hostel. She was back to her normal self, but with a big gap in her memory. She couldn't remember the last 6 months at all. We asked the tantric what had happened. He told us that a lower-class Muslim spirit called a jinn had been placed on her. Apparently, someone had attached the spirit to a strand of hair, mixed it into a traditional Muslim rice dish called biryani, and Sarah had eaten it. He even claimed to know who was behind it, but refused to reveal the identity. Later, Sarah recalled that she had a Muslim friend who had fallen in love with her. She'd politely declined his advances but remained friends. Her last memory was the day of Eid, when he invited her to lunch and served her biryani. After that, everything was blank. Sarah's parents decided she wouldn't return to that college. She continued her studies locally and eventually moved to the US, living a peaceful life now. We avoid talking about those months. It's like a shadow we don't want to wake. Now, moving across the world to central North Carolina, USA, a place filled with dense woods and wide open pastures. When I was a teenager, I was wrestling with the grief of losing a sibling and all the anger that came with it. My home life was shaky, and the woods were my refuge. I would wander there for hours, sometimes even sleeping outside if home felt unsafe. One night, after a particularly nasty argument with my family, I stormed into the woods. I was so angry that I screamed, punched a tree, and cried until everything inside me felt raw. Then, suddenly, the familiar chorus of insects went silent. The heavy summer night became eerily quiet. No crickets, no cicadas, nothing but this creeping silence. Then, a foul, almost sweet-smelling stench invaded the air. Having lived in the country, I knew the smell of dead animals, but this was different, intensely worse. Panic rose in my chest, and I spun around to head home. My instincts screamed to run, and I did, though I was no runner. I dashed across our property, hearing heavy footfalls behind me keeping pace. I couldn't see anything, just the sound and that awful odor trailing behind. I never went back into those woods at night after that. The fear lingered, and if I had to be outside, every outdoor light was on, and I kept far from the trees. Years later, a similar experience happened on a rainy night. I was driving home late, around 1 a.m., and had to swerve into a ditch to avoid hitting a dead doe lying in the road. As I passed, I caught a pair of glowing orange-green eyes in the side mirror. The figure was tall, canine in shape, soaked from the rain. My heart pounded as the same sickly sweet odor filled my car. I panicked, took a long detour, and begged my parents to turn on all the outdoor lights before I rushed inside. I never took that road again at night. I've never smelled that odor since, but those woods still feel wrong, like something doesn't want me there. Now, let me tell you about a childhood ghost sighting. When I was about 7, waiting for my mom to pick me up for school, I sat on her bed watching TV. I felt like someone was watching me, and when I looked into the hallway, I saw a black figure of an old man wearing a sombrero standing there, staring. It wasn't a friendly presence. It felt unsettling and definitely not human. I bolted and shut the door, too scared to say anything. Years later, my grandma told me she had seen the same figure twice in that very apartment, describing him exactly as I did, without knowing my story. My sister had seen him too. That place always felt sad, heavy with an awful vibe. Even visitors would say they felt uneasy. My mom never saw anything but never wanted to move, even when my stepdad urged it. I still believe in ghosts because of that experience. To this day, I never sleep with my bedroom door open. Here's another one from rural Pennsylvania, 2007-2008. I was 18, living alone in an old 2-story apartment above some friends of the family's previous place. I had 2 cats, one since I was a toddler. The oldest cat started staring and meowing at the same corner of the house, which was new behavior for her. Sometimes, late at night, I'd get these creeping feelings of unease. I'd turn on hallway lights just to feel a little safer. After 2 years, things hadn't gotten better. The TV would sometimes make a noise like someone flicking the side of the plastic, but I thought it was just a quirk of the device. The apartment had a long hallway with stairs in the middle. Across was the kitchen. To the right, a small bathroom. At the end was my bedroom. To the left was an office with a door to the attic, and a living room beyond that. Opposite the office was a large chalkboard attached to the wall. It was my command center, full of phone numbers, tasks, appointments, notes spanning 2 years, rarely erased. One weekend, a girl I was dating came over to stay. I had to work, so she did some chores. When I got home, part of the chalkboard was erased. I was furious and asked her why. She swore she hadn't touched it, but the eraser marks were obvious. We argued briefly, but then went out for dinner and a movie. When we returned, everything on the chalkboard was back. Every note, every number in my handwriting. No eraser marks. We freaked out. She cried and left to stay with her parents. I called my mom, who spoke to the friends who helped me get the apartment. They told me they'd always believed it was haunted, said their dog stared at that same corner my cat did, but never told me because they knew I would have refused to live there. Let me tell you about a house where my whole family experienced paranormal things. When I was a kid, about 7 or 8, I was at my stepmom's mother's house, a place I'd been many times before. I was watching TV in the living room when I saw a tall shadow shaped like a man walking down the hallway and disappearing into a bedroom. I was so scared I ran to the other room where the family was. I never told anyone until years later. Fast forward 10 years. I was living there again during high school. One night, my boyfriend and I were watching TV with the door open. He suddenly said, "Jody is awake." I told him no, she was asleep. He said he saw her walk down the hallway. We checked, she was asleep. He was freaked out. I told him my childhood story, and he wanted to leave immediately. My dad often saw a little girl's spirit in the house. He saw a child's head peek around the hallway corner, assuming it was my little brother, but when he checked, the kid was asleep. It happened multiple times. The spirit seemed shy, often standing close while he cooked. My stepmom was terrified, and once even said a little girl tugged her shirt in the kitchen. One night, I heard a female voice say, "Hey," behind me in the kitchen. I turned, but no one was there. Another time, my sister and her friend were in her room when all her knickknacks suddenly flew off her nightstand. They screamed in terror. Moving on to Baltimore, 2019. I lived in an old house in a working-class neighborhood. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the house creaked and things would fall off shelves. The basement flooded once, adding to the creepy vibe. One night I woke up and saw a shadow figure standing at the foot of my bed. It had a defined body, but no facial features. I thought I was dreaming, but I was awake. This happened twice. The basement always smelled faintly of natural gas. Curtains would fall, and sometimes it felt like something was chasing me out the back door. A friend visited, claiming he was sensitive to ghosts. We heard footsteps in the basement. When he asked for a sign, a nearby motion-activated floodlight flicked on and off. My friend who lived there before said his roommate saw a similar figure standing over him. The roommate lived in the basement and complained about things moving or breaking. Over time, he became irritable, which was unusual. We were all relieved when the lease ended. Finally, a story from central Indiana. I grew up in a house built before the Civil War, with hidden false walls, secret passageways from its days on the Underground Railroad. My family called the unseen presence there Mr. Cooper. When I was a kid, I never thought much of it, except that my dad wouldn't take anything upstairs after sunset and avoided the second floor. On Christmas Eve 2001, I was woken by the door opening and the window AC unit's dials clicking on and off by themselves. The door then slammed shut. My sister and I were terrified and needed the stairway light on to leave that room. Years later, during renovations, I woke to scratching and knocking noises coming when a junk-filled room behind my bed. Suddenly, a dark, featureless figure appeared by the window when car headlights swept across the room. My brother and I screamed and ran. In 2010, I was alone in the house when I heard footsteps jogging down the stairs and a door crashing into a cabinet. I fled and met my parents elsewhere. They told me they had to move across the country because of a new job. The house was eventually torn down. No one wanted to live there. I even have a weird photo of my niece taken in that house, where some say a face appears in the corner. Maybe it's just a trick of the light, or a hand moving quickly. You can be the judge. So, these stories, whether from India, America, or anywhere else, show that sometimes the unexplained brushes close to us all. They remind us that the world holds mysteries, some frightening, some sorrowful, all worth remembering. Thanks for listening to these tales with me. Stay safe, and maybe keep a light on tonight. Sometimes our homes hold little secrets, little moments that make you pause and wonder. I want to share with you one of those moments, my third experience with something not quite explainable in the house where I live with my family. I won't dive into the first two because this one stands out the most, by far. This happened about a month ago, around 10 o'clock at night. Picture this with me. I'm in my bedroom, settled in, reading quietly on my bed. The rest of my family is in the living room, chatting or watching TV, just a few rooms away. Now, our house has this long hallway that stretches like a bridge between the main living space, the kitchen, dining, living room, and the bedrooms, which are all clustered together at the far end of the hall. My bedroom is the first on the left as you reach the end, and my bed is pushed right up against the wall closest to my parents' bathroom. That bathroom, by the way, is only accessible through their room. So there I am, the soft glow of my bedside lamp illuminating the pages of the book I'm reading, when I suddenly hear it, the subtle creak and shuffle of footsteps coming up the hall. I've lived here long enough that I can tell who's where just by the sounds around me, the way the floorboards groan or the breeze flutters the curtains. And right then, I hear someone walking steadily, coming up the hallway toward my room. They stop just outside my door. I can't see anyone from where I'm lying on my bed, but the pause is clear. Then, without a sound, those footsteps continue, turning into my parents' room. I hear the floor creak softly outside their bathroom door, followed by the unmistakable sound of bare feet against cool tile. There's this gentle rustling, like someone moving around, fixing their hair or adjusting something, for about 10 seconds. And then, silence. No footsteps leaving, no creak of the floorboards as they walk away. It's strange because I'd assumed it was my dad. He tends to shuffle when he walks. But then I hear his voice coming from the living room, followed by my mom's. So whoever was there wasn't either of them. What struck me most wasn't fear. It was more like a quiet acknowledgement. This presence knew I was there, but they were just going about their own business, calmly and gently, like a soft hello from another realm. It wasn't frightening at all, just peaceful. I lay back, my heart slowing, the house settling into its usual night rhythm. And I realized sometimes the most extraordinary things come in the quietest moments. Just a whisper down a hallway, a presence that doesn't want to scare but simply to be noticed. Hey there, I want to share a story about a trip I took to Las Vegas that turned out to be way more interesting than I expected. And not because of the usual Vegas glitz and glam. You see, I travel a bit for work, and over the years, I've developed this quirky hobby of staying in hotels that are rumored to be haunted. It's kind of like a little personal adventure for me. One of my all-time favorite spots is the Menger Hotel in San Antonio. It's got that old-world charm and a reputation that's pretty much confirmed haunted in my book. But that's a story for another time. This one's about Planet Hollywood in Vegas. So this particular trip, I had a quick job, just some field measurements to take in a hotel lobby. The hotel where I was supposed to work was fully booked, but Planet Hollywood across the street had rooms available, and honestly, it was cheap. I didn't know anything about the history or any ghost stories connected to it at the time. No ghost hunting tours, no late-night investigations, just in and out, quick and simple. The less time I spend in Vegas, the better, right? I arrived, checked in, and headed up to my room. The place was modern, clean, and comfortable. A little too sterile for my taste, considering I usually like the older, creakier kind of hotels. But it was nice enough. I dropped off my bags, then headed over to the job site to get the measurements done. Boring, straightforward work. After that, I grabbed some dinner and picked up snacks for the night. I had an early flight the next morning, so no partying for me, just settling in with some movie channels. I was sitting in my room, watching the Olympics when I first heard it. The unmistakable sound of a key card sliding into a door slot, followed by the handle trying to turn. Now, this door was set up to auto-lock as soon as it closed, and I had also put the deadbolt on. The handle jiggled 3 times, then stopped. I didn't hear anything else and just figured maybe someone had the wrong room. That's pretty common in hotels, right? I went back to watching TV, trying to ignore it. About 15 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the key card slid in a little harder, and the handle turned with more force. Then I heard whispering outside the door. I couldn't make out the words, but I swear I could imagine the voices, hushed and urgent. They tried again, really pushing on the handle, but the door stayed firmly locked. I started to feel a little uneasy, but told myself not to freak out. I'm no stranger to weird hotel noises. The Olympics were still more important. Another 15 minutes passed, and then the door sounds came again, softer this time, like someone trying to sneak in quietly. The whispers returned, but still, I couldn't catch what was being said. I got up and went to the door to see if I could peek out. No peephole, of course. I watched the handle move slightly, then retreat, then move again. It wasn't budging much because it was locked tight, but the subtle movements were enough to make my skin crawl. So I finally shouted, "This room is taken!" half expecting someone to say sorry or maybe explain they'd made a mistake. But there was nothing. No reply. And that's when it hit me. I couldn't hear anyone walking away. I could hear other hotel guests passing by all day, footsteps, chatter, the usual hustle. But not this time. Nothing. I went back to the bed and sat down, thinking maybe a manager would show up and sort things out. Hours passed. It got late. I was watching Big Trouble in Little China, one of those movies that demands your full attention, when it happened again. The key card slid into the slot. The handle turned. This time I was mad. I rushed to the door, flung it open, and looked out both ways down the hall. Nothing. The corridor was empty, but I could still hear whispering. I followed the sound, turning the corner, and again, nothing. That's when I got that familiar tingle down my spine, the kind of feeling I get when something unexplainable is happening. I walked back to my room, and just as I stood in front of the door, I heard the whispers again, this time coming from behind me. I whirled around but saw nothing. I slipped inside, shut the door, and as I started moving away, the card slid into the slot and the handle turned once more. By now, I was definitely unnerved. But if my stays at the Menger or the Coronado taught me anything, it's to turn that nervous energy into curiosity. Unfortunately, I didn't have any ghost hunting gear with me, just my phone, which wasn't much help. But I wanted to know what was going on, so I grabbed my phone and started looking up the hotel's history. Turns out, Planet Hollywood used to be the Aladdin Hotel, and before that, it had a couple of other names. A few people had died there over the years, and as I dug deeper, I realized the room I was staying in might be on the side of the building where some of those incidents happened. Suddenly, what had been a boring trip got a whole lot more interesting. I busted out the phone's voice recorder, hoping to catch the door sounds or whispers. Throughout the night, the door kept doing its thing, the card sliding in, the handle twisting, and the whispers never really stopped. Now, you might think those whispers were just other guests, but there was a distinct difference. You can hear and feel when someone's walking down the hall, their footsteps, their voices bouncing off the walls. This was different, softer, more elusive. Later, as I lay in bed, the wall that separated the bed area from the bathroom suddenly sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Then I heard water running in the bathroom. I got up and checked. Nothing was on. The silence was absolute. I sat back down, and then I realized the sounds were coming from the wall itself, not the bathroom. The dragging noise happened a couple of times, then stopped abruptly. When morning came and I finally checked out, I felt a little sad. What started as a dull, routine night had turned into a hair-raising experience I'll never forget. Sure, it didn't change my opinion of Las Vegas. It's still not my favorite place. But the hotel itself? Comfortable beds, clean rooms, and maybe, just maybe, some ghosts to keep you company if you're lucky enough to notice. So yeah, next time you're in Vegas, consider a stay at Planet Hollywood. You might just find yourself listening to whispers and wondering who's knocking on your door in the middle of the night. Hey there, I want to share with you some odd and kind of spooky experiences I had growing up in my childhood home. It's a story that stuck with me for years, and I think you'll find it pretty intriguing. So, picture this. My family and I lived in a really cozy house from around 2006 to 2015, nestled in an old coal mining town. The kind of place where the past lingers in the air, you know? Our basement was massive, fully furnished, and honestly, it felt like my own little world. There was a TV, my computer, all my toys scattered around. It was the perfect hangout spot for me and my friends when they came over. One day, I had my best friend at the time, let's call her Emma, over at the house. We were probably between 10 and 12 years old, just on the cusp of those weird, curious years when everything mysterious seems way more real. Emma and I were both really fascinated by anything paranormal. So, living in a town with such a heavy coal mining history, we thought, why not see if there might be any ghosts lurking around? Before I get into the crazy stuff, I should tell you that Emma had already mentioned something weird about our house. Whenever she stayed over for the night, she said she'd see shadows of people holding hands, right against the wall. Just fleeting shadows, but enough to freak her out a bit. So one afternoon, we downloaded these free EVP apps on our little iPod Touches. You know, those apps that supposedly capture voices from the other side? We didn't expect much. But strangely, the app kept picking up words like coal and mine. It was bizarre because, sure, the app was probably just random, but still, those words felt oddly fitting for our town's history. Then, on another day, Emma and I decided to be a little braver. We wanted to actually communicate with the spirits. So I asked simple yes or no questions and told the ghost to tap once for no, twice for yes. I remember asking if someone was there, and right then, we heard two distinct taps coming from the bookcase against the wall. Man, that scared us so much. We were frozen, our hearts pounding, but we asked another question, and it answered again. I can't quite remember what it was, but those taps were so clear. Not long after, we grabbed a ball and set it on a table in front of us. The basement was eerily still. No drafts or anything that could move the ball. It was pretty heavy too. We asked the ghost if it wanted to play, half joking, and suddenly the ball rolled right off the table. Just like that! We both jumped back, eyes wide, breath caught in our throats. It was wild, honestly, like something out of a movie. Fast forward to my 12th birthday party. I had 4 friends over, and I told them about the possible haunting in my house. They were super intrigued, so we asked the ghost to let us know it was there by tapping or dimming the lights. At first, nothing happened. But about an hour later, out of nowhere, all the lights in the house just went off. Complete darkness. We all sat there, stunned and a little terrified, trying to figure out what just happened. There was one more moment that really stuck with me. I was alone in my room, just chilling with my iPod. Across the room, there was an outlet with a thick plug inserted, but it wasn't charging anything. The plug was firmly in the socket, no loose wires or anything. Suddenly, with my own eyes, I saw that plug unplug itself and fall out of the outlet, landing on the floor. I was across the room. How could it have possibly come out on its own? It made no sense, but it happened right in front of me. Looking back, those experiences were scary, exciting, and definitely unforgettable. Growing up in that old coal mining town, surrounded by history and mystery, my basement became a portal to the unknown. And even though I've moved on from that house, those moments still echo in my mind, reminding me that sometimes the past really does reach out to the present. Hey, I want to share something really unsettling that's been happening to me over the past few days. It's about this mysterious dark figure that keeps showing up. Now, I'm not talking about some sleep paralysis demon. You know, the ones that trap you in place and mess with your mind. I was fully awake and able to move. I could see it clearly. And it's not a hallucination either. I've dealt with those before when I'm wiped out and sleep deprived. But this presence? It's darker, heavier, and truly sinister. So, let me take you through what's been going on, day by day. Day 1. It all began after one of those brutally long days at work. I got home around 4 in the afternoon, completely drained. You know how it is, being told to run errands only to end up waiting around for hours doing nothing. It was one of those maddening days. I tried to unwind the usual way, playing video games, chatting on the phone with my girlfriend, watching some YouTube videos. But as night fell and I finally crashed around 1 a.m., things took a weird turn. I started waking up, eyes fluttering open slowly, but I couldn't figure out why. It felt like my body was preparing for something, like some signal I couldn't quite grasp. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this jangling noise, keys loudly clinking, as if someone was desperately trying to find the right one to my room in a panic. My eyes snapped open, and right behind me stood this dark figure. It moved so fast, rushing towards me with a terrifying intensity. I was frozen for a second, then I jumped up, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The figure instantly backed off and faded away into the shadows. I was gasping for breath, my pulse racing, and without thinking, I scrambled for the light switch. I looked around, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, but there was nothing, just the quiet darkness of my room. I downed some water to calm myself, turned off the lights, and finally tried to get back to sleep. Day 2. It happened again, eerily similar. The keys jangling, the dark figure charging at me, that same rush of terror. But as soon as I stood up, it would vanish without a trace. I started questioning my sanity. I've seen things like this before, during my childhood. Spirits, hauntings, even conversations with entities. But those stopped when I was about 14. I thought I was done with this stuff. That chapter closed. Yet here we were, the fear creeping back in, like whatever haunted me as a kid had returned. I couldn't shake the voice in my head, the one riddled with hateful thoughts about myself and others. It felt louder, more persistent. Day 3. Last night was the worst. I just finished a grueling 24-hour shift and collapsed into bed around 4 a.m. I was barely asleep for 15 minutes when the keys jingling started again, but this time, it was closer. So close I could feel its breath on my neck. I swear, the heat radiating from its body was tangible, and the hatred it carried was suffocating. I jerked my head around, but there was nothing there. My heart was hammering, and fear clamped down on me like a vice. I flicked on the TV for some light and rearranged my pillows so I'd face the door, no longer turning my back to it. I'm sitting here now, trying to calm down, hoping it doesn't come back tonight. The figure feels more aggressive with each visit. I also want to share a story from when I was a kid about my first real ghost encounter, something I call the Beast. It's different from all the other spirits and shadows I've encountered over the years. More violent, more aggressive. The Beast stayed with me in my old house, but after I moved, it never followed. I was about 7 years old, living in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. I didn't know much about ghosts or demons back then. I hadn't even seen a horror movie. I was just a kid, innocent and unaware of what was about to enter my life and change me forever. I had a rough childhood, insomnia, ADHD, asthma, and a heart murmur. I first lived in a small apartment next to my great-grandma's house and my grandparents' gas station. Later, we moved to a larger neighborhood that was still being built up, right around the time my parents began their divorce. During that turbulent time, my beloved cat, he was an outdoors cat, a fierce little hunter who kept snakes and scorpions at bay, was poisoned. One stormy night, my mom woke me up, crying uncontrollably. She took me to the garage, where my cat lay in his bed, cheeks stained green from the poison. We never found out who did it, but I hated whoever was responsible with every fiber of my being. I was devastated. By the time I got home from school the next day, he was gone. My grandma was burying him in the yard, like we'd done for all our pets before. A few weeks later, life was settling down a bit. My brother was coming over for a sleepover, and my mom had just received 2 cats from a coworker, Zach and Chester, to help lift her spirits. That night, my brother and I played with Legos past 10 p.m. Eventually, my mom told us to go to bed. We brushed our teeth, turned off the lights, and then, right there in the corner of the room, we saw it. A bright white figure with an indescribable shape. Something that looked like a creature but wasn't quite any animal I knew. It felt terrifying. We screamed in terror. My brother sprinted to turn the lights back on, and the figure vanished. Even though we were trembling, when we turned the lights off again, it didn't come back. That was just the beginning. In the following days, I started feeling a dark, ominous presence. At first, toys would fly out of my closet to the other side of the room. I thought it was just me, so I ignored it. But soon, the toys were thrown directly at me, objects shattered, and the fear grew. My parents thought I was causing the chaos, but I kept telling them it was the things. Sleep became impossible. I was terrified in my own home, a 7-year-old fearing for his life. My mom dismissed it as nightmares or imagination, but I knew better. This was real. When I moved to the United States at 10 years old, the beast stayed behind. I haven't seen it since, and I hope I never do again. Years later, after my mom remarried and we moved to Clinton, Mississippi, a sleepy town surrounded by endless woods, the hauntings shifted. I lived in a small trailer park with my cats, Zach and Roxy. Chester had died in Puerto Rico after being hit by a car. At first, I thought I was free from the hauntings, but then the strange presence returned. My cats would stare at walls or meow at empty air. Animals can sense things we can't. The next thing to arrive were the echoes. These were voices, male and female, calling my name from the woods, sometimes from inside the house. They were trying to lure me somewhere dangerous. I never followed. One night, while showering, I heard my name called in a soft, feminine voice that sounded like my mom's, but she wasn't home. I was alone and terrified. I hid in my room with all the lights on until she returned. Sometimes I woke up with scratches, deep and jagged, like fingernail marks, not from my cats. I slept with lights on, terrified of what lurked in the dark woods that surrounded my home. I felt countless eyes watching me, driving me nearly insane. The echoes never showed any physical form, so I knew they weren't the ones scratching me. Then I saw something new, the hand. One night, while grabbing snacks in the dark, I saw a ghastly hand reaching out of my bedroom door. It was dark orange, with rotting, falling off fingernails, truly disgusting. The echoes whispered, but I couldn't understand. I screamed and called my mom, who stayed on the phone until she got home. She never believed me, thinking I was hallucinating. The hauntings worsened, and I was breaking down mentally. But there were more horrors, the orb, the voices, which eventually overwhelmed me completely. Switching gears, I want to share a story from a friend who's in the U.S. Army about strange happenings on their base. There's this 3rd floor in their company building that's unused due to black mold, and during the day it's quiet. But at night, anyone on a 24-hour CQ shift has reported eerie activity. Loud noises, footsteps, banging. The building dates back to the Korean War, and there's a dark rumor about a female soldier who died there under tragic circumstances involving intoxication and an attempted cover-up. No one knows if it's true, but the presence is undeniably felt. One friend explored the third floor once and found a room mysteriously open, filled with children's toys. He ran away fast. Another soldier went up at night, and as soon as he arrived, the lights flickered and he heard footsteps. He grabbed some toilet paper from that floor, because the others were out, and bolted downstairs. Finally, I want to tell you about Lillian. Not a ghost, but a presence all the same. When I first moved to Orlando, I rented a room from a kind older couple. I got married and needed a place for us both. We found this tiny old house with a landlord who didn't want to bother fixing much, but the basics worked. A few weeks after moving in, the landlord's wife told us her mother had just passed and they were taking her back to the old country. The atmosphere in the house shifted slightly. It felt different, though nothing overtly strange happened at first. I found a beautiful brooch under the porch's rotten boards and placed it on the mantel, planning to return it to the landlord. That's when the odd things began. My wife started noticing our wedding keepsakes, glasses, knives, photos, were being moved around. She blamed me, but I swore I wasn't touching them. Yet every time we moved them back, they'd be rearranged again. Eventually, she gave up fighting it. One day, while dusting, I try to help out, I noticed a breeze that wasn't from any fan. It made me think maybe Lillian, the landlord's mother, was behind the strange movements. My wife thought I was crazy, chalking it up to my imagination. When I returned the brooch to the landlord's wife, she turned pale, revealing it was her mother's brooch, lost when she was a kid. The woman laughed and thanked me warmly. But as I walked back to the house, I saw a shadowy figure behind the lace curtains. I tripped on a rock, and when I looked again, it was gone. Later, my wife complained of hearing footsteps and little noises. I teased her about mice, but she insisted it sounded like tiny feet. From then on, strange movements and flickers of light became a part of our daily life. Sometimes, I'd catch out of the corner of my eye a flicker of movement, not quite a shadow, but something moving from the kitchen to the bathroom, a path where light shouldn't travel. So, yeah, that's been my experience with the dark, the haunted, and the unexplained. It's scary, exhausting, and sometimes feels like it's never going to end. But sharing it with you makes it a little less lonely. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share with you a story from when I was living in Piqua, Ohio, back in my late teens and early 20s. It was at 410 East Ash Street, this old 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a cozy living room, dining room, 2 bathrooms, and a basement. But not just any basement. This one had a dirt floor and a tunnel that looked like it had been part of the Underground Railroad. The house itself was built sometime after the massive flood of 1913, but there had been a house on that very spot dating back to 1832. That old house was destroyed by the flood, but the land's history seemed to linger in the air. Now, this house always had this eerie vibe that I couldn't quite shake, but I was pretty skeptical about ghosts. I mean, if they were real, surely my grandma would have come to visit me, right? We lived there about a year, and nothing unusual happened at first. Then one night, my wife's sister Stacy came running into the house, all panicked and breathless. She said something had chased her up the stairs and then started wiggling the door handle. Now, Stacy and her friends were always getting drunk on weekends, so I just laughed it off. "Stacy," I said, "you're probably just imagining things after all those drinks." A week later, our 5-year-old son said something that sent a chill down my spine. There were legs with no body following you and Mom into the bathroom. I tried to brush it off, telling him it was probably just his imagination, maybe scared because of what his aunt had said. but I felt that shiver run up my own spine. Still, I held on to my skepticism. Then one night, my wife woke me up, whispering, "Do you hear the TV knocking?" I rolled over and said, "No, it's probably just the old TV making that cracking noise as it powers down." This was an old tube TV, the kind you turn on and off with a knob. I shrugged it off again. Weeks passed, and I had just finished a grueling 12-hour overnight shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Fun times, right? I sat down at the dining room table, trying to relax, when suddenly I heard children running and laughing upstairs. I woke my wife, who was sleeping in the recliner because she refused to sleep upstairs after the TV knocking incident. I asked her, "Tiff, why are Sydney and Travis running around upstairs?" She looked at me and said, "They're not. They're asleep under the covers on the floor." I was stunned when I checked. Sure enough, they were fast asleep. I thought maybe I was just tired and hearing kids outside or something. About a week later, my wife and I had a heated argument. We were yelling back and forth, and I told her to go turn the damn TV off. When she did, I noticed a shadow, about 7 feet tall, shaped like a person. I got goosebumps just thinking about it now. At first, I thought maybe it was just a shadow from the TV light, but when she switched it off, the shadow was still there. It was so dark, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I waited for her to walk in front of it to see if the shadow would change shape, but it didn't. I shouted, "There's something behind you!" She jumped into bed and hid under the covers. I kept watching, and suddenly, faster than lightning, this shadow, darker than any darkness I've ever seen, rushed toward the TV and turned it on. It was like a scene from a movie, a black mist flowing into the TV, flicking it on. I couldn't believe my eyes. I quickly turned on the light and told my wife to turn the TV off because the shadow was looking right at me. We left the light on and slept with it on that night. The next morning, I still felt like maybe I was imagining things, so I asked my wife if she remembered what happened. That's when I knew. Whatever this was, ghosts or something else, it was real. Years after we moved out, we started delivering newspapers for the Piqua Daily Call. One day, there was a special issue dedicated to the people affected by the 1913 flood. As I flipped through, I saw our old house, 410 East Ash Street. The article mentioned that 2 little girls had drowned on that property long ago. Just thinking about that still gives me chills. Looking back, I realize we weren't just living in a house. We were sharing it with shadows of the past. That shadow, darker than the darkest night, wasn't just a trick of light. It was something else entirely. Something that still haunts my memories to this day. You know, there was this one evening when I was working the late shift at this tiny neighborhood store, and something really odd happened. I was just moving slowly through the aisles, straightening up products and nudging everything forward on the shelves. It was the usual routine, but then, out of nowhere, I got this strange, prickly feeling, as if someone was watching me. Now, I had heard the stories before, you know, like the cooler doors that would unlatch and latch all on their own, even though there was only one person in the building, nowhere near those doors, and mysterious sounds that would come from certain parts of the store at odd times. But honestly, those thoughts hadn't crossed my mind for weeks leading up to that night. Right at that moment, I knew it wasn't a coworker. Why? Because I could hear all of them chatting and laughing in the office behind me. I was usually the last person out on the floor, facing the aisles, especially on closing nights, since I was one of the lower-ranking folks there. So it wasn't unusual that I was alone out there. I quickly glanced around, making sure no one was nearby. Then I turned back toward the front of the store, and that's when it hit me. The unmistakable feeling that someone was right behind me, just peering over my shoulder. Now, I could have freaked out, but I decided to be friendly instead. Maybe talking to it would ease my own nerves. So, I whispered, trying to sound calm. "Hello, I'm just straightening things before we close for the night. Don't mind me." For what felt like half a minute, that presence just kept watching over my shoulder. It was eerie, sure, but honestly, the feeling I got wasn't malicious or scary. It felt curious, like it was just checking that I was putting everything back the right way. Then, out of the corner of my left eye, I caught movement near the front of the store. I turned just in time to see a woman, a pale woman with light-colored clothes and blonde hair, walking quickly across the front, heading toward the entrance. Now, we had been closed for at least 15 or 20 minutes by then, and this little store doesn't have many places to hide. So I thought it was probably my coworker, the last cashier who'd been working up front. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I called out her name and hurried toward the front, thinking she'd just forgotten something and was coming back for it. But then, something made me freeze in place. I heard her voice calling back from the office, asking me what I needed. That's when my heart was really pounding. If she was in the office, then who was walking up front? Snapping out of my shock, I ran the last few steps to the front to see if there was anyone there. But there was nothing. No one. The store was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Not wanting to be caught off guard, I quickly checked all the usual hiding spots, behind the counters, near the shelves, but no one was there. That prickly feeling came back, stronger this time, and I jogged back to the office, still trying not to believe what I'd just seen. I asked a cashier I thought I'd seen if she'd been looking for anything up front, secretly hoping she was a sprinter I didn't know about. But she had been in the office the whole time. There were only 3 other people in the store besides us, and none of them looked anything like the woman I'd seen. Plus, the figure was much taller and lighter than her, and I couldn't recall hearing a single sound from someone walking so quickly across the front registers. I even asked if one of the guys would come back up front with me to double check, but they just shrugged and shuffled uncomfortably. They said if I couldn't find anyone, then there was no one there. And honestly, I have never seen our closing crew wrap things up so fast as we did that night. Looking back, I kind of chuckle at how scared I was. The spirit, if you want to call her that, seemed gentle and thoughtful, maybe even trying to be helpful. I think the disappearing act just caught me off guard. But after that, strangely enough, I actually felt more comfortable working alone at night, knowing she was there, watching over the place, completely harmless. Hey, I want to share this story with you, something that's been with me since I was a kid, something I haven't really talked about much until recently. So, I was born in 1983, and this happened when I was around 5 years old, which would put us in 1988. I was over at my friend Josh's house. He lived just 2 doors up from me, which for a 5-year-old felt like the farthest place I could go on our street. Luckily, most of my closest friends were all within that small little corner of the neighborhood, so I spent a lot of time there. Josh and I were hanging out in his basement. Now, his basement was finished, cozy, with this warm, brownish carpet that felt soft underfoot, a big fireplace that gave the whole room a kind of snug glow when it was lit, and a massive TV that we'd watch cartoons on. We usually spent our mornings there, right before or just after breakfast, with Josh's mom keeping an eye on us from the kitchen nearby. His baby brother Nathan was usually around too. We grew up hearing ghost stories, you know? It was just kind of part of life back then, especially with older kids around and my 2 older brothers telling their tales. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared us for what we saw that day. We ended up calling it the blonde thing because, well, that's what it looked like to us. So picture this. Josh and I are sitting on the carpet, playing with action figures, the TV humming softly in the background. We're laughing and just having a good time. Then, out of nowhere, we notice movement about 10 feet away, near the far side of the room. The basement was empty except for us. His mom was upstairs, close to the top of the stairs in the kitchen, looking after Nathan. We both just stopped and looked toward where the movement was. And there it was, this really short figure, maybe about 3.5 feet tall, moving around the corner and down the short hallway leading to the back bedroom of the basement. The way this figure moved was so strange. It was bobbing its head from side to side, almost like a kid skipping or playfully bouncing along. What really got us was the hair. It was incredibly long, longer than anything I'd ever seen on a person that small, and it was the lightest blonde, almost white, cascading down over the shoulders and all the way to the floor. The hair seemed to shimmer a little, catching the light in a way that made it look almost unreal. We never really saw a face or any clothes, just that long, flowing hair draped over something that looked like a little girl-shaped figure. We stared for maybe 3 seconds, but those seconds felt stretched out, like time slowed down just enough for us to realize how weird and scary this was. Then, without thinking, we both screamed and bolted up the stairs, our hearts pounding like crazy. I remember thinking, what the heck was that? But we didn't have words for it back then. All we knew was that it was creepy and unlike anything we'd ever seen. From that day on, whenever we talked about it, we just called it the blonde thing. It became this mysterious little secret between us. Years passed. I didn't think about the blonde thing for a long time, probably not since I was a teenager. Then, out of the blue, in 2018, Josh sent me a friend request on Facebook. We hadn't really been in touch since middle school, so I was surprised. When I opened his message, it was the usual, "Hey, how have you been?" kind of thing. But then, at the very end, he wrote, "Remember the blonde thing?" And just like that, all those memories came flooding back, just like in those movies where the characters get that call that tells them the nightmare isn't over. Turns out, we saw it once more. This time, outside in the backyard of our neighbor Leota's house. We both saw the same skipping, short figure with that almost white hair trailing down to the ground disappear into the woods behind the yard. It was exactly the same. Of course, I tried to look it up, see if anyone else has ever seen anything like this. The closest I found was some old Germanic folklore about long-haired blonde entities that look like little girls and are said to try and steal babies from homes. Creepy stuff. Honestly, I'm still curious if anyone else has seen something like this, or if it was just some strange childhood hallucination. But I know what I saw, and I know how real it felt. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share a story with you. Something that happened back in the early 90s when I was working at this old movie theater in Worcester, Massachusetts. The place was kind of magical, or at least I thought so. It was built way back in 1926, called the Poli Palace then, and it had this grand vaudeville and movie vibe, seating for 2,500 people. Over the years, it changed hands, and by 1959, Showcase Cinemas took over and modernized it, but you could still feel the echoes of its past in every corner. I was the assistant manager, which meant I had keys to every spot. I spent hours exploring, from the creepy basement, cluttered with old newspapers, shards of broken crystal sconces, and all kinds of forgotten debris, to the ceiling above the auditorium where you could see the wood beams creak. There was this old music store and a ballet studio on the second floor, long walled off and left untouched. And then there was the abandoned bathroom and the manager's old office, where back in the 40s, managers were once held at gunpoint during a robbery. The building had stories, and I was obsessed with uncovering them. I even went to the public library to dig through every newspaper article I could find. There was this rumor about a stagehand who supposedly died from a fall, but I never found any solid proof. No article, no record, just whispers. One day, my mom called me with something strange. She'd met a woman at her work who claimed to have psychic abilities, someone who said she got feelings about places and people. Knowing how much I loved the theater, my mom asked if she'd ever been there. She told the woman it was said to be haunted, and about my search to confirm the stagehand story. The woman said something that stuck with me. She said, "I get the feeling it was someone with a name that starts with the letter M." I laughed it off. I've never really bought into psychics or their so-called powers. I figured it was just coincidence or maybe a guess. Then, not too long after, I was the only manager on duty one slow weeknight. The 7 o'clock shows had started, and I was sitting in the basement offices. Funny thing, the space used to be a big men's room back when the theater was first built. It had this eerie vibe, quiet but heavy in the air. Suddenly, the office phone rang. The cashier up front called me on the intercom and said someone was on the main line asking for me. I pressed the button and picked up the receiver. The moment I did, my ear was hit by this awful, loud electronic squealing and static, like a radio trying to tune in but never quite getting there. I cleared my throat and said, "Hello?" A man's voice answered, calm and quiet. Just one word. "Hello." Then silence, except for the static noise. I repeated, "Hello?" trying to get more from the caller. Again, the same calm voice said, "Hello." No emotion, no change, just the word. I was starting to get nervous, so I asked, "Who is this?" There was a pause, the static crackled louder, and then came the voice again. "This is Michael." Flat, monotone, like someone reading from a script but with no feeling behind it. I blinked, heart racing a bit. "Michael who?" I asked, hoping for some clue. Then the line went dead. Just silence and dead air. I called the cashier back and asked if she knew who it was. She said the caller didn't identify themselves to her but had specifically asked for me. She said they hadn't called back. This was before caller ID was a thing, so no way to trace it. Michael is a pretty common name. We actually had 2 Michaels working at the theater, but neither recognized the voice, and both said they didn't make the call. The strange electronic squealing never happened again. Later, I remembered what the psychic woman said about a name starting with M. It gave me chills. Was it a prank? Maybe. But if it was a well-played one, because here I am, decades later, still thinking about that night and that strange phone call from someone named Michael. It's one of those moments that sticks with you, you know? The kind of mystery that never fully lets go. Hey there, I want to share with you some stories from my past that still linger in my mind. The kind that make you pause and wonder about the things we can't quite explain. I hope you'll feel the chills and the curiosity as I tell them, just like I did living through them. First, let me take you back to the late 1990s. My then fiancée, Linda, and I were visiting Savannah, Georgia, a city dripping with history and whispers of the supernatural. We stayed at this charming bed and breakfast, nestled in one of those picturesque squares that Savannah is famous for. The house itself was a beauty, built way back in 1870, filled with antique furniture that creaked just enough to remind you of its age. Our innkeeper, Annette, was the kind of person who made you feel instantly at home. She was warm, talkative, and full of stories about Savannah and the house itself. She casually mentioned that there were some unexplained happenings here and there, some even in the very room where we were staying. Now, the bathroom had this clawfoot tub with a shower, and one morning after my shower, I stepped out, glanced at the mirror, and froze. The mirror was fogged up, of course, but there was something eerie about my reflection. The moisture on the glass caught the light in such a way that my pupils appeared gigantic, completely black and soulless, like something out of a nightmare. For a moment, it was like staring into the eyes of a demon. My heart was pounding. I jumped back, startled by the sudden darkness in my own reflection. But then, my logical mind kicked in. It was just the condensation and the way the light played tricks on the glass. Still, it was unsettling, that stark contrast between the dark pupils and the rest of my normal reflection. I called Linda in to see if she noticed it too, and she did. We both stood there, puzzling over how just my pupils could look that way while everything else stayed normal. It was one of those strange, fleeting moments you can't quite explain. Savannah's reputation as a haunted city suddenly felt a little more real to me. Have you ever seen your reflection twist in such a strange way, like the mirror was hiding a secret? Now, let me tell you about a place I once called home. An old, half-fallen Georgian colonial in central Massachusetts. Built in 1901, it was a romantic wreck, the kind of place that screams history from every creaky floorboard. I was young and maybe a bit foolish at 25 when I bought it. The previous owner was a man named Victor, a local who had passed away before we moved in. I never met him, but his legacy was everywhere. In the antiques we found, in the slapdash repairs he'd made that made us curse his name on more than one occasion. One of the treasures was a dusty old Hohner accordion tucked away in the attic. We heard stories about strange happenings, apparitions and odd noises, but I never saw anything myself. It was more a fun idea than a real fear. One night, we bought this nifty gadget to turn our regular lamps into touch-activated ones. You could tap any metal part to switch the lamp on or off, and even dim it through different brightness levels. Pretty cool, right? So, one evening, we were watching TV in the dark when suddenly, the hallway lit up. The bedroom lamp had turned itself on. I got up, walked over, and tapped it off. But moments later, it flickered back on. Then it started cycling rapidly, dim, bright, off, over and over. My fiancé and I exchanged nervous glances. It was like the lamp had a mind of its own. Trying to lighten the mood, I blurted out, "Victor, knock it off!" And just like that, the lamp went dark and stayed off. That was the only time it happened. We unplugged the device soon after, not wanting a repeat performance in the dead of night. Was it a faulty switch? Probably. But the timing? Calling out Victor's name and the lamp obeying? That still creeps me out. I don't miss that house, but I do miss the stories it left me with. Lastly, I want to share a more somber tale from my senior year of high school. I lived in rural northern Maine, in a tiny old farmhouse my dad bought near the Canadian border. The house was small, wood-framed, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Connected was a barn, half falling apart. It was a gloomy place, full of spiders, flies, and in the fall, swarms of ladybugs. Inside the barn's outhouse, we found a ratty bearskin coat, a kind of eerie treasure that made me uneasy. There was no central heating, just a massive wood-burning stove in the basement that barely kept the cold at bay. Winters could drop to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and I got used to feeling chilled all the time. From early on, I felt uneasy in that house. My dad and his girlfriend told me about strange things they experienced, like feeling a cat walk across their legs while lying in bed, only to find nothing there. Sometimes they'd feel a touch on their hair or head while half asleep. Dad once said he felt a cold hand press on his bare thigh while sitting on the toilet. One winter night, Dad told us he'd woken to see a woman standing by his bed. She was dressed in a long gown, about 35 or 40 years old, looking at him quietly before moving to the window and fading away as dawn broke. After I moved back to Massachusetts, my friend Jennifer called me, excited and freaked out. She'd been talking to someone who knew that house was haunted. His cousin, who lived there years ago, had experienced the same ghostly touches on the hair. Hearing that independent confirmation sent shivers down my spine. I myself only felt it once, a light touch on my feet, but the whole house was a heavy, oppressive kind of creepy, even in daylight. Years later, while on vacation with my wife, I took her to see the house again. It was worse than ever. Siding torn off, junk scattered, an old pickup rusting in the yard. It felt like a place forgotten by time, marked by sadness and something darker yet. As we stood watching from the road, a man appeared between the truck and the door. He was disheveled, wearing a brown jacket, smiling and beckoning us silently to come closer. It was unexpected, eerie. My heart pounded as I floored the gas pedal and sped away, not daring to look back. Maybe it's not the house itself that's bad. Maybe places like that carry the weight of all the pain and fear that happened there. They soak it in, and it clings to the walls and shadows. I believe that house was already marked when we arrived, and we only added to its darkness. So those are my stories. 3 different places, 3 different kinds of eerie experiences. Sometimes what we can't explain leaves the biggest impression, doesn't it? Thanks for listening and letting me share these memories with you. You know, when I first stepped into the world of the circus, I was just a kid, barely 17. But the circus life, it's this strange, magical, yet sometimes eerie world. I traveled a lot as an acrobat, performing in various hotels, dazzling crowds under sparkling lights. But there was this one circus I worked with that was quite different. It wasn't the traveling kind. It was a static circus set up in one location, but they only ran their big shows during certain seasons. In the off-season? Well, that's when things felt different. I was actually living right there, inside the circus grounds during the off-season. During the daytime, there were usually a few people around, maybe for classes or small events. But when night fell, I was often the only soul left wandering the tents and trailers. The silence was heavy, but oddly peaceful, except for a few creaks and the distant rustle of fabric in the breeze. One particular night, I was in the kitchen area, preparing my dinner. The kitchen wasn't fancy, just a small space tucked away behind a makeshift divider. Picture this, 2 big pieces of fabric hung like curtains, blocking off the entrance, roughly the size of a doorway. They weren't solid walls, but they did the job of hiding whatever was behind them, while still allowing someone to pass through. I finished cooking and started to walk through this fabric doorway, but suddenly, I felt it. Something solid, like a person standing firmly on the other side, blocking me. I stopped, startled. "Oh, sorry," I said casually, thinking it might be someone from maintenance hanging around late. But there was no answer. I pushed gently, and still nothing. I slid the fabric aside and looked through. Nothing. No one. No shape, no shadow, no object that could have been in my way. Just empty air. I stood there for a moment, heart thumping, trying to make sense of it. I'm a pretty logical person, so I wasn't about to let my imagination run wild just yet. I spent the next 5 minutes trying to recreate the feeling. I stepped onto the fabric, leaned my weight against it, even held the knife I'd been using close to see if it snagged or if the fabric was thicker somewhere. I tried everything I could think of, but none of it felt like that sudden, solid resistance I'd just encountered. When morning came, I talked to some of the longtime workers, curious if they had ever noticed anything strange. They told me stories, whispers about footsteps echoing in the night, faint sounds with no source, and of course, classic ghost stories that seemed to linger like a shadow over the circus grounds. It wasn't the terrifying kind of tale, but it definitely made me pause. Honestly, I still don't know what that was. Was it a ghost? Some trick of the mind? Or something else entirely? I wanted desperately to prove to myself that it was all in my head, to brush away that initial unease with logic and reason. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, the unknown just stays unknown. And maybe, just maybe, that's part of the magic of the circus after all. Hey there, I want to share with you a story that's been on my mind for a long time now. It happened to me when I was driving my truck across the country. I'm an over-the-road trucker, which means a lot of long stretches of highway and lonely nights. This particular event took place on a dark, quiet night in early August, around 2 a.m., while I was heading south on US 93 in Nevada. I was about 30 miles north of Las Vegas, and let me tell you, traffic was almost non-existent. For at least 40 minutes, I hadn't seen a single vehicle. The only thing lighting up the road was the bright beam of my truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. I was on the phone with a good friend of mine, just chatting about random things to keep myself awake. Then, out of the corner of my eye, about 300 feet ahead on the shoulder of the road, I noticed something. At first, I thought maybe it was an old, knocked-over construction sign, or maybe a plastic bag caught in the brush. But as I got closer, the shape started to change. I could make out what looked like a person, a figure standing there. Now, this is where it really gets strange. That area is totally deserted, with nothing but miles of empty desert around. So when I was just about 5 yards away, I could see clearly. It was a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. He had a school backpack on his back, and he was clutching a white plush bunny tightly to his chest with his right arm. He was just standing there, completely still, his eyes locked onto mine with a stare that was so cold and emotionless, it sent a shiver right down my spine. What really freaked me out was that he didn't even blink or flinch as my massive truck, weighing 80,000 pounds and speeding at 65 miles an hour, roared past just a yard away from him. I mean, who could stay that calm and unreactive to a giant semi-truck racing right by? My heart started pounding like crazy. Every hair on my body stood up, and a chill I can't fully describe crawled down my back. I've never felt so deeply unsettled in my life. You see, I've never had any paranormal experiences before, so this was totally new and completely unnerving. As I drove past that boy, my mind raced with worry. I thought, if I see him again a few miles down the road, I'm going to lose it. But strangely, he never reappeared. The rest of my trip was quiet and uneventful, which only made the whole encounter feel even more unreal. I still can't explain what I saw that night. I'm not saying it was a ghost or the spirit of a child who passed on. I just don't have any rational explanation for it. And I know it wasn't a hallucination because I was wide awake, talking on the phone the whole time. The desert was completely empty, and yet, there he was, standing there like a silent watcher. What on earth was a little kid doing alone in the middle of nowhere, clutching a stuffed bunny, staring at a truck barreling past him? It's a mystery I haven't solved, and honestly, it still haunts me every time I think about it. Hey, I want to share something that's been really unsettling me lately. It's about this strange, rotten smell that's been creeping into my neighborhood. And honestly, it's got me pretty on edge. I live in a fairly large city here in Ontario, not far from the outskirts, maybe 4 or 5 blocks from where the city ends and the wilderness begins. It's mostly residential where I am, with just a few small restaurants sprinkled around. Wildlife isn't unheard of, but it's usually just the smaller critters. We get deer and coyotes now and then, but bears? Those are super rare, like once every 5 years or so. So with that in mind, the smell I'm about to tell you about just doesn't seem to fit in my neighborhood. Now, over the past year, I've noticed a lot of odd things happening around me. Nothing dangerous really, Just weird little things that don't quite add up. But last month, something shifted. I started feeling this really intense, predatory vibe outside my home, like something was lurking and watching, and it triggered this full-on fight or flight reaction in me. It lasted for a few days, and I even recorded some of what I experienced, but that's a whole other story for another time. After it stopped, I felt safe enough to be outside again, especially at night, which I prefer for cycling. It's quieter, calmer, and somehow feels more natural. So I got back to my late-night rides, and that's when I first noticed the smell. At first it was subtle, a faint whiff of rotting meat as I passed certain houses. I thought maybe it was just bad breath, or maybe some neighbors had trash that was really starting to decay, or even some roadkill nearby that I just couldn't see. But the smell kept popping up all over the city, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. Then, one night, that predatory feeling came back again, stronger than before, and I stopped going out at night for a while, just waiting to see if the feeling would fade. Eventually it did, so I started cycling again. But this time, the smell was worse. Way worse. About 1 in every 15 or 20 houses had this awful stench, like a freezer full of meat that had been left outside and sealed up for weeks and weeks. It was beyond nasty, even worse than the garbage bins behind grocery stores. At first, I figured it was just the local dump blowing in the wind, but then a friend of mine mentioned she'd noticed the smell too. She described it exactly, like a dumpster packed with expired meat, and pointed out it only came out at night and seemed to be coming from certain houses, not just random places. What's more, she lives too far from the dump to smell it where she is. That's when things started clicking for me. After hearing her say that, I decided to investigate more closely. I started walking my sibling's dog through the areas where I'd noticed the smell. About half an hour from my place, the dog's behavior changed. He'd sniff the air nervously and pull towards certain streets, and the smell would hit me like a punch in the face. As the stench grew stronger, the dog's fur would stand on end, and he'd act like he was really on edge. This kept happening for a few nights, and soon, walking him became a challenge because he was so uneasy. One night, I took him a different route, near my own neighborhood where I hadn't noticed the smell before. Everything was fine at first, but on the way back, we cut through a park, and the dog just froze. His fur bristled, and he kept huffing the air nervously. I smelled it too. The stench was so strong. It had to be coming from one of the houses bordering the park. I wanted to get closer, but the dog refused to move forward. It was a well-lit park with open space and a paved path straight through it, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Still, I turned around, and the dog followed me quickly, tail tucked and fur raised. We took the long way home. I wasn't exactly scared, but I was definitely uncomfortable, both because of the smell and how my dog was acting. Then, just a few nights ago around 3 a.m., I woke up to the dog pacing in the hallway. I thought he needed to go out, so I tried to take him outside, but he seemed hesitant. When I got him out the door, he immediately turned around and whined to come back in. I stepped outside to check on him, and while he calmed a bit, he stayed close to the door. I brought him back inside and went back to bed, feeling pretty tired and unsure of what else to do. But now, tonight, the dog is being clingy like I've never seen before. And when I stepped outside to take the recycling bins out, I caught the faintest hint of that rotten meat smell again. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to make me worried. I'm honestly not sure what to think. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, but this smell is so distinct and so common now that it doesn't make sense. It can't just be trash. If it were, more people would have noticed it, right? I thought maybe it was carrion, but the smell is way too frequent and specific for that. I also considered the dump again, but it's definitely too far away for the smell to reach here this strongly. Maybe there's a rational explanation I'm just not seeing. But if there isn't, I don't even know where to start trying to figure out what's causing this. One thing I can say is that I still haven't been able to pinpoint exactly which houses the smell is coming from. I can narrow it down to a stretch of about 5 houses on one street, but it could also be coming from their neighbors' backyards on the next street over. It's all so strange and unsettling. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm sharing this because I want to hear if anyone else has experienced something like this, or has any ideas. It's hard to be the only one noticing something so bizarre and worrying. Thanks for listening. Hey, I want to share this strange experience that my partner and I had during our recent trip to the Oregon coast. We were hoping for some sunshine, but the weather was pretty gloomy, so instead of sticking to the main sights, we decided to just drive and explore whatever caught our eye. Now, I come from the Rocky Mountains, so navigating winding mountain roads is second nature to me, and I usually have a pretty solid sense of direction. But what happened on this trip? Well, it threw me for a real loop. So picture this. We're cruising north on the coastal highway, just scanning for beaches to explore, when I spot this tiny road branching off. It turned out to be a Forest Service road, all narrow and a little rough looking, but paved at first, so I thought, why not? We took that turn. The road was barely wide enough for one car, winding steadily up and down a big hillside, moving northward through the thick forest. Now, if you've never been to the Oregon coast forests, imagine this. Towering trees that reach high above, but have almost no branches until the very top. The canopy is dense, blocking out a lot of light, and the forest floor is carpeted with ferns and thick underbrush. It has this eerie, almost otherworldly vibe, especially on a day like this. The woods were so quiet. Usually you'd hear a buzz of activity, birds chirping, squirrels scampering, but that day, the silence was almost heavy, broken only by the occasional bird call or the soft rustle of leaves. We stopped a few times to get pictures and even stepped a few yards into the woods, feeling that strange quiet pressing in around us. By the time the pavement ended and the road turned to gravel, the sun was dipping low and a thick fog had rolled in. It wrapped the forest in a ghostly veil, limiting our visibility to maybe 30 yards. The fog muffled the sounds, deepening that unsettling silence. Both of us started feeling a little uneasy, but we kept going. The road started sloping downward, and we figured it would eventually lead us back to the highway. After about 10 minutes of winding down through switchbacks, we came to a fork. One path turned east, the other west. We couldn't decide, so we played rock, paper, scissors. I remember the tension as we waited for the outcome. The kind of quiet anticipation you get when you're unsure of where you're headed. The right fork won, so we took that. A few bends later, the road sharply turned north. As we rounded the corner, something caught my eye. A red SUV stuck in a ditch. The front end was pointed almost straight up, as if it had slid off and flipped into this awkward position. It looked recent, but nobody was around. The SUV seemed mostly intact, but then I noticed a huge dent on the driver's side. What puzzled me was that there were no obvious obstacles nearby that could have caused that damage. No trees, rocks, or debris. It was just there. I told myself not to dwell on it, thinking maybe the dent was old and the owners had already left. We pushed on, leaving the SUV behind. About half an hour later, the gravel gave way to pavement again, and soon after, we were back on the highway. I took a right to continue north, aiming for the beaches. But then, something strange hit me. I started recognizing the road signs. They looked familiar, like I'd seen them before. My partner and I exchanged uneasy glances, both feeling this creeping sense of déjà vu. Then, as we passed the entrance to the very Forest Service road we'd driven up, it all clicked. We'd somehow circled back, ending up on the highway 5 miles south of where we'd started. Lying here now, hours later, writing this down, I still can't make sense of it. I swear we didn't turn around or head south at any point. I've looked for that road on maps, but I can't find it. The whole experience feels like something straight out of the Twilight Zone, a phantom road trip through a foggy forest that refuses to exist on any map. It's left me with a deep, unsettling feeling that lingers even now. It started with my mom, when she was a teenager. She and a few of her friends were messing around one night with a Ouija board. You know, the kind of thing people do when they think it's just a game, when they don't really believe anything is going to answer back. But something did. It told them its name was Dane. And then it gave my mom a date. Her death date. Of course, at the time, they were scared, but I think part of them still wanted to believe it was just nerves, or one of the girls moving the planchette, or their imaginations feeding off each other. But when that date came, my mom and her friends got into a car accident. They all survived, thankfully, but after that, things followed her for a while. Strange things. The kind of things that make you stop trying to explain every sound in the house. Eventually, it seemed to fade. Years later, my brothers and I were born. One of my brothers had his own experience when he was about 7. He came home one day and heard loud crashing coming from his room. He said it sounded like his speakers were being thrown around, like the whole room was being torn apart. But nobody was home. When he went in, the room was a wreck. For me, the first big thing I really remember happened when I was young too, around 7 or 8. I was home alone. My brother was outside in his car, getting ready to leave. My bedroom door started shaking. Now, that door used to move sometimes if the wind caught it just right, so I didn't panic immediately. I checked the windows. They were closed. No fans were on. Nothing was moving the air. I checked again, then a third time, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't just scaring myself. Then I ran back to my bed. The door shook again. When I looked toward it, this cold feeling came over me. Not just cold air, but that heavy kind of cold that feels wrong. I slammed the door shut and got back on my bed. Then it got violent. The door started pushing and pulling, visibly, way harder than anything normal could have done. It wasn't a little rattle anymore. It looked like something was on the other side, trying to force its way in. I called my brother crying and begged him to come back inside. The second he came through the front door, it stopped. I heard him running up the stairs, and by the time he reached the top step, everything was completely still. After that, things would come and go. In that house, I used to see what looked like a young woman in white. She wore this old-fashioned dress, almost Victorian, maybe even older looking. She never really spoke, but seeing her was enough. She looked out of place, like she belonged to a different century and had somehow ended up in our hallway. These days, it feels worse. My girlfriend and I recently moved into a new place after being homeless for a while. For the first 3 months, nothing happened. Honestly, I hoped maybe it was over. Then, last night happened. We had a couple friends over. Nothing weird was going on at first. My girlfriend and her friends left the apartment for a bit, and right after she came back through the door, the LED lights on my entertainment stand turned on by themselves. The strange part is those lights had been broken for almost a year. They stopped working after a move and hadn't lit up once since. But last night, they turned on and started flashing colors directly at my girlfriend, who has epilepsy. Then they stopped, and nothing happened for about an hour. Later, I got tired and went to lie down alone. That was the first time I'd really been in the bedroom by myself since we moved in. No girlfriend, no dog, just me in the dark. and I immediately felt watched. As I lay there, I kept hearing scratching and little noises around the bed. I thought maybe the dog had come in, so I looked over the foot of the bed. But it wasn't the dog. I saw this black shadow, almost like a person-shaped silhouette, curled up in a ball. Then it vanished under the bed, almost like dust being pulled into a vacuum. I sat back against the headboard, just frozen, trying to decide whether I had really seen what I thought I'd seen. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it because my girlfriend and I have both had experiences before, but this felt different. A couple minutes later, I noticed that static-looking darkness your eyes make when they're trying to focus in a dark room. Except in one spot, the static cleared. It looked like someone was standing there. I stared at it, waiting for my eyes to adjust, hoping it would turn into a jacket or a shadow from furniture or anything normal. But instead, it started getting bigger, closer, until it looked like it was right there on the bed. That was when I got up and left the room. I went straight back to my girlfriend and our fingers. And that's why I'm sharing this now. I want to know if anyone else has ever experienced something like this, or if anyone has heard of a spirit, entity, or presence using a name like Dane. For reference, I'm the youngest of 3. I'm 20 now, and whatever this is, it feels like it started coming after me when I was around 7. I lost my husband recently. His name was Laurent. He was French-Canadian and Abenaki, and we think he passed from complications connected to cancer, though the truth still feels foggy in places. There were difficult moments near the end that we explained away as terminal restlessness. That was the phrase that made everything easier to file away. But now, looking back, I'm not so sure. After he died, I started digging through old posts, trying to find stories about him, little pieces of our life that still had his fingerprints on them. And I came across one I had written 3 years ago about our pantry door closing by itself. At the time, I remember being startled by it. The door didn't just swing shut in some ordinary way. It wasn't physically possible, at least not in any way that made sense. Still, I tried to explain it away. I came up with a harmless theory and moved on. But what I had forgotten was Laurent's reaction. He wasn't impressed at all. He basically told me that if I knew what was happening outside, I wouldn't be getting worked up over a door. I wish I remembered every detail of what he said next. I only remember pieces of it, and those pieces have stayed strange. He used to drive home from work along this dark, wooded stretch of road. One night, he saw what looked like a glowing wolf step out into the road. It didn't run. It just stood there and stared him down, right in the headlights. Then, as his car got closer, it vanished. After that, he said something else appeared. A figure, more human-shaped, started following his car as he drove home. I don't remember exactly how he described it, but I remember the feeling in his voice. Whatever he saw frightened him badly, and I believe he told me it happened more than once. Each night, whatever it was seemed to come closer to our house. Eventually, he said he encountered it near his little shed outside, the place he used as a kind of man cave. He said it was trying to force its way in. That was not something Laurent wanted to talk about. He only described it once. After that, he shut the subject down. I later found old bookmarks and searches related to things like La Loba, but I never got the sense he thought that was the answer. He told me plainly that this was not something I could just look up. Around that same period, I noticed other things too. There were searches about doors opening and closing in the house, about why a car door might suddenly slam shut on its own. He started piling things in front of doors and windows. He stopped going out to his shed at night. At the time, I didn't connect all of it. Now, I can't stop connecting it. Laurent believed the experience was a death omen, not a general warning, not some spooky story meant for anyone nearby. He believed it was meant specifically for him. The next year, he was diagnosed with cancer. He went through treatment and made it into remission. There were no clear signs that the cancer had returned, and still, somehow, he predicted his own death. Near the end, he became intensely worried about doors and windows again. The things he had once stacked in front of them had long since been cleared away, and that seemed to bother him. He was convinced something malevolent was coming. He spent more and more time in the back rooms of the house. Quiet rooms. Secluded rooms. He would look out the windows for long stretches, watching for something I couldn't see. Then, he died unexpectedly. That is the part I keep circling back to. This was not a man who was easily frightened. He loved paranormal stories. He had no real fear of death, even after close calls earlier in life. He believed in an afterlife full of love and light. That was always his view. He had also had plenty of brain scans and neurological exams over the years for unrelated reasons, and nothing unusual was ever found. But there is one more thing I keep wondering about. The timing of that experience may have lined up with a surgery he had before the cancer diagnosis. Something went very wrong during it. He was told that what happened was one for the record books, but the surgeon never explained what that meant. I've wondered, quietly and probably desperately, whether he had to be resuscitated, whether something happened to him in that operating room that opened a door none of us understood. I don't know what to believe. All I know is that my husband saw something on that road. He believed it followed him home. He believed it was coming for him. And now that he's gone, I keep thinking about the doors, the windows, the glowing wolf, the thing outside his shed. I keep wondering whether he knew something the rest of us couldn't see. I grew up in the Bible Belt, so church was just part of life. I was taken to services all through childhood, mostly Methodist and Baptist churches. I remember stepping inside a Catholic church once when I was very young, but the memory is hazy, more like a photograph left in the sun. I also went to one of those big, modern evangelical churches at one point, the kind that feels almost like a shopping mall. Honestly, the most supernatural thing about that place was looking around and thinking, wait, why is there a coffee shop in here? I haven't been inside a church in years now, but sometimes, when I think back on it, there are certain moments that still hook into my curiosity. A part of me wonders what I'd feel if I walked into one again. Would it feel normal? Would it feel empty? Or would I notice the same strange things I noticed back then? When I was around 12, I was already starting to doubt a lot of what I'd been taught. Christianity had begun to feel full of cracks to me. One thing that always bothered me was prayer. I would sit there silently, trying so hard to feel connected to God, and nothing ever answered back. I know some people might say actually hearing God would be terrifying, or maybe even dangerous, depending on how literally you take the Bible. But from the way everyone talked about having a relationship with him, I thought I might at least get one quiet moment that felt real. I remember one service where a woman suddenly dropped to her knees and started sobbing in the middle of the sermon. People rushed around her, excited, saying she had felt the touch of God. They placed their hands on her like they were hoping some of it would pass into them too. I just stood there, watching. I remember feeling unsettled, not just uncomfortable, but deeply out of place. It was a small church, and somehow it felt even smaller in that moment. I had this strange feeling that something was watching the whole thing unfold from somewhere behind the pews. Not watching with reverence either, more like it was amused. I couldn't prove that feeling came from anything outside of me. Maybe it was anxiety. Maybe it was dissociation. Maybe it was just a kid realizing the world didn't feel the way adults promised it would. But after that, I started questioning everything more seriously, especially because there were already things happening outside of church that felt paranormal to me. Crosses and prayers didn't stop them, no matter how much I believed they should. After a while, sitting through church became harder and harder. I started choosing the very back pew whenever I could. Part of it was because I didn't want anyone bothering me, but part of it was because I wanted to watch. I wanted to see if there was a reason my gut kept telling me something else was there. At some point, I noticed shadows near one of the doors inside the church. They looked almost human-shaped. I couldn't see eyes or faces, nothing that told me where they were looking, but I felt them looking straight back at me. They didn't move. They just stood there. And when I looked away and then looked back, they were gone. That hit me harder than I expected. I had been told my whole life that a church was God's house, that nothing bad could enter it, that it was protected. But whatever those shadows were, they didn't seem impressed by that idea. Back then, that shattered something in me. I wanted to believe it was only that one church. Maybe that building was different. Maybe something was wrong with it. Since I was still a kid, I couldn't just visit other churches whenever I wanted, so I waited for chances when my family would go somewhere else. Eventually, one of those chances came. A relative was getting married out of state, and the ceremony was being held at a church. It was medium-sized, I think Baptist, and during the event, 2 of my cousins and I started wandering around. We found a stairwell leading down to a basement level. At the bottom were 2 large doors with little windows in them. Behind the glass, everything looked dark. My cousins immediately got creeped out. I dared them to come with me, but they refused. They stayed near the top of the stairs, whispering that they didn't want any part of it. So I went down alone. I honestly thought the doors would be locked, since most of the other rooms we had tried were closed off. But these opened right away. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was floral, but not in a fresh way. It was heavy and sweet, almost sickening, like too many funeral flowers packed into a room with no air. Beyond the doors was a dim hallway. There were tiny lamps here and there, lighting little patches of wall and floor, but most of the space was swallowed by shadow. My heels clicked against the white tile, and the sound echoed so sharply that it made me want to freeze. I remember trying to walk quietly, because it felt wrong to disturb the silence down there. That's the only way I can describe it. It felt like the quiet belonged to something. The farther I went, the more my head hurt from that thick floral smell. I kept passing small pools of lamplight, and every instinct in me was telling me to turn around. But I was stubborn, and I wanted proof. I wanted to know whether churches really felt protected, or whether something else could live inside them too. At the end of the hallway, I reached another dim seating area. Past it, there was another hall, but that one was completely black. The second I looked into that darkness, every part of me screamed. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't imagination gently tapping my shoulder. It was pure animal instinct, the kind buried somewhere ancient in the body. Something in me knew, or believed it knew, that there was something in that dark, and if I stayed there, I was in danger. So I ran. I ran back through that basement in my ridiculous heels, somehow without falling, with the sound of my own footsteps exploding around me. I made it up the stairs, breathless and shaking. My cousins weren't even there anymore. They had gone back to the wedding party. Everything upstairs was normal. People were talking, laughing, eating, celebrating. Meanwhile, my heart was still pounding like I had escaped something. My family stayed in town one more night to visit with relatives. It was actually a nice evening. Nothing strange happened while I was awake. But that night, I dreamed I was back in that exact basement, standing at the edge of that black hallway. In the dream, I couldn't see what was there. I could only feel myself being attacked in the dark. I don't usually have nightmares immediately after something scares me, so that stayed with me. It felt too specific, too connected. I've never had another church experience quite as intense as that one, but I still can't shake the feeling that churches hold something I don't fully understand. Maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's the atmosphere. Maybe it's the weight of all those people praying, grieving, confessing, begging, and hoping in the same space for years and years. But to me, churches have always felt haunted in their own way. And sometimes I wonder whether abandoned churches are worse, or whether active ones are stranger, because everyone assumes they're safe. I want to tell you about my grandfather, though calling him that still feels strange, because I never really knew him. He died when I was a baby, so I don't have memories of him the way other people might. What I have are the stories people told, the silence people kept, and the times I believe he showed himself. For privacy, I'll call him Ivor. Ivor inherited an old family farm that had been passed down for generations. It was the kind of place people in town talked about with respect, even pride. But inside the family, it was something different. He was cruel, arrogant, and violent, especially toward my father. Part of that hatred came from something my father didn't even know until he was around 50 years old. Ivor wasn't his biological father. My grandmother, who I'll call Pearl, had been involved with another man before she married Ivor. From what I understand, he was a traveling country musician, and the relationship was short, volatile, and frightening enough that Pearl's parents stepped in to scare him off. Pearl was young and pregnant with my dad when it ended. The strange part is that my dad's real father apparently sent birthday gifts for years. Pearl never gave them to him. She hid them away in the attic, where they sat for decades, collecting dust. Eventually, Pearl married Ivor, and they had 2 sons together. I'll call them Arden and Miles. Ivor treated my father and Arden terribly. He worked them hard on the farm, and from what I've been told, he beat my father with whatever was nearby, sometimes even metal tools. But to the people in town, Ivor was a respected Christian family man. Someone helpful, someone generous, someone good. That's the part that has always unsettled me. How a person can be one thing in public and something entirely different behind closed doors. Arden was younger than my father, and while he suffered too, I think he had just enough room to become himself. He was artistic. His drawings used to hang in Pearl's house and in my father's home. I barely knew him because he left as soon as he could and built a life far away in New York. I heard he worked restoring old stone figures, things like gargoyles, which always felt oddly fitting to me. Then there was Miles. Miles came along much later, and from everything I've heard, Ivor adored him. He was funny, bold, spontaneous, the kind of kid who could make people laugh without trying. He was also spiritual in a way that seemed unusual for someone so young. My dad once told me Miles wrote a poem about going to heaven. I never got to read it, but I've thought about it more than once. One day, Miles brought some friends out to the farm. They had recently watched Teen Wolf, and there was a scene where Michael J. Fox rides on top of a car like he's surfing. Miles wanted to do that. He wanted that same wild, reckless freedom. So his friends got into one of the farm trucks, and Miles climbed onto the hood. They drove down a country road. For a few moments, I imagine he felt fearless. Then the driver hit the brakes. Miles flew off the hood and struck his head on the road. He died right there. I never met him, but his absence was one of those things that lived in the house like another person. You could feel the shape of the hole he left. After that, Ivor blamed my father for Miles's death. I don't know how that made sense to him, but grief and cruelty can twist together in ugly ways. Their relationship became even worse. By then, my father had children of his own, including my brother and eventually me, and he was still trying to hold on to the farm, no matter how badly Ivor treated him. Then Ivor gave my father an ultimatum: leave the farm with his family, or else. My father had only a couple of days before everything would be taken from him. And then Ivor died. He was electrocuted while working on the water pump. Supposedly, he forgot to shut off the power at the box nearby. The town mourned him, but my family didn't. My father said he had been in another town getting supplies when it happened, though I've never known what to believe. The farm was remote. Emergency responders would have taken a long time to get there, especially back then. My father was the one who found Ivor's body. Later, he used to point out the place near the pump and the power box, explaining how Ivor had forgotten to turn it off. There was something in his voice when he said it. Not exactly joy, more like a cold satisfaction he tried to bury, but couldn't. After Ivor died, he didn't leave the farm. My brother was the first one to see him. He was about 12, staying overnight at Pearl's house. In the middle of the night, he woke up to the sound of snoring. When he looked over, he saw Ivor sleeping in his old reclining chair, glowing blue. My brother didn't scream. He just pulled the blankets over his head and tried to go back to sleep. My father believed the farm was haunted too, though he didn't talk about it much. I remember him mentioning gates moving on their own out in the pasture, but he never liked to go into detail. Pearl denied everything, completely. She was always cold about it, almost sharp. If you told her something happened, she'd shut it down immediately. Maybe she didn't want to believe Ivor was still there. Maybe she knew more than she ever said. I can't know for sure. The first time I encountered him, I was around 12 too. Some horses that didn't belong to us had wandered into the front yard of Pearl's house. She went outside to move them along, and I sat on the front porch to watch. The front door was behind me. After a few minutes, I heard a man's voice behind me. It was angry, low, guttural. At the same time, this cold rush of air went straight through me from the direction of the door. I screamed and ran toward Pearl. When I tried to tell her what happened, she said it was only the wind. But it was summer. There was no wind hitting me from where I sat, and the cold came from behind me, from the closed door. Closed doors don't breathe voices. There was another night I believe I saw him in my own house. I heard moaning in the hallway, and when I looked, there was an old man standing near my bedroom door. The door was open wider than I had left it. He was tall and thin, almost bent over. His face was bony. His hair and beard looked dry and stringy, like old straw. His eyes were sunken but sharp. He had that same blue glow my brother described, but around the edges of him, there were streaks of orange, almost smeared like paint. The last time I saw Ivor was during the day. I was running around the farm with my old best friend. We were probably ghost hunting, or at least pretending to. We were kids, and we already knew the place had a reputation, so we were doing what curious kids do. Behind Pearl's house, there was an old white shack with peeling paint. It was full of junk and half falling apart. I had seen it plenty of times before, and it never bothered me. But that day, everything stopped. My friend and I were laughing, then suddenly we both went quiet and looked toward the shack. There was a dusty window, cloudy and cluttered from the inside, but behind the glass, I saw a face. Ivor's face. He wasn't glowing that time. He looked pale, gray, and dead. His eyes looked like empty sockets, but somehow they were furious. My friend screamed before I did. My brother was nearby on a tractor, and we ran for him. We cut across fences and pasture lands so fast we could have gotten hurt. He was angry because we could have been run over, but he let us climb into the tractor anyway. We stayed with him while he fed the cattle. For a long time, I forgot that part. I think it scared me so badly my mind packed it away. Years later, my brother mentioned that there had been a day when my friend and I came running to him, quiet and shaken, insisting we stay on the tractor. That brought it all back. I haven't seen Ever since, and honestly, I'm grateful. I haven't stepped foot on that farm in about 10 years. A few years ago, my brother told me Ever appeared in one of his dreams, begging him to come back. The farm has been falling apart ever since we left it, and I don't know whether that place is haunted, cursed, or just soaked through with everything that happened there. But I know this much. Some places remember. And that farm remembers everything. I want to tell you about something that happened years ago, back when I was still a kid living out in the middle of nowhere. Around 2008, my stepmother had this habit of bringing home strange things. She loved yard sales, flea markets, estate sales, antique shops, little vendor booths at fairs, anything like that. If something looked old or unusual, she would buy it without much thought. One day, she came home with this tall, narrow mirror. I don't remember exactly where she got it, but I remember hearing that it had come from an old medical building, maybe a hospital. I'm not completely sure if that part was true, but she seemed proud of it, like it made the mirror more interesting. It was a skinny, full-length mirror with a plain border, nothing fancy. But the way it was placed made everything worse. It sat at the very end of our hallway, almost perfectly filling the wall. That hallway was long, tight, and uncomfortable, with bedrooms, bathrooms, an office, and the laundry room branching off from it. There were doorways on both sides near the mirror too, so when you looked down the hall, the reflection seemed to stretch forever. You couldn't really avoid looking at it. Every time I came out of my room or walked through that part of the house, there I was, far away in the glass, standing in that thin, reflected hallway. At first, it was just a feeling, that heavy, watched feeling, like the house was holding its breath. Then the footsteps started. They usually began after everyone had gone to bed, sometime between 9 and 11 at night. I was a kid, and I kept my bedroom door cracked open for my cats. I would be lying there in the dark, trying to sleep, and then I'd hear it. Slow, heavy shuffling from the end of the hallway. Back and forth. Back and forth. It sounded like someone dragging their feet across the floor, pacing from one end of the hall to the other. Whenever the steps got close to my door, I would freeze. I'd barely breathe. I remember staring at that little crack in my door, waiting to see if it would open wider. Sometimes the footsteps went on for hours. Sometimes they stopped around midnight. Other nights, I would wake up around 3 in the morning and hear them again. Nobody in my family ever seemed to hear it. Whenever I asked, they brushed it off. But when friends stayed over, they heard it too. One night, my friend Mara was sleeping over, and the sounds started earlier than usual. We were whispering to each other, asking, "Do you hear that?" And then this low, drawn-out moan came from right outside my bedroom door. It sounded like an old man, tired and angry at the same time. Mara grabbed my arm and whispered for me to be quiet. We pulled the blankets over our heads, but I looked. I don't know why. I think by then I had gotten used to being scared, and curiosity got tangled up in it. The door had opened wider. I didn't see a solid person exactly. It was more like colors smeared together in the shape of someone old and thin, blue and orange, almost like wet paint moving in the dark. I could make out a bony face, a beard, and these sharp eyes looking through the doorway. I dropped back under the covers and stayed there. We whispered about anything else we could think of until we finally fell asleep. After a while, I got used to it in a strange way. I knew I wasn't going to sleep anyway, so I'd sneak my laptop under the blankets and watch movies with headphones in. The footsteps became part of the house, like creaking pipes or wind against the walls, except I knew it wasn't that. Then other mirrors started bothering me. In 6th grade, some girls at school locked me in the bathroom with the lights off and told me I had to do the Bloody Mary ritual before they'd let me out. I was terrified of the dark, and I just wanted to leave, so I did it. I turned 3 times and faced the mirror. The reflection looking back wasn't mine. I had wild, frizzy hair back then, but the figure in the mirror had smooth, straight hair. The shape was wrong. The posture was wrong. I screamed and shoved the bathroom door open hard enough to knock the girls away. They laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, but I knew what I had seen. Not long after that, I was home alone putting laundry away. My parents' room was across from mine, so I only had to cross the hallway with the basket. I suddenly felt watched, and I turned toward the mirror. There was something in it. It was pressed close to the glass, blocking where my reflection should have been. Just a dark shape, but wrong in a way I don't like describing. I don't want to give it too much detail, even now. I'll just say it didn't look human. I screamed, ran into my room, and slammed the door. Then I panicked even harder because I had a mirror in my room too. I thought it might show up there next. It didn't. Not that day. But after that, I'd see shadows move across mirrors. Quick shapes. Little flashes that disappeared before I could fully understand what I was seeing. And eventually, whatever it was didn't stay tied to that hallway anymore. My parents were divorced, and my mom lived about an hour away in the city. I saw her on weekends, and I started seeing it there too. By the time I was around 14 or 15, it changed. Sometimes it still looked horrifying, but sometimes it appeared as this strangely attractive young man with features that weren't quite human. The first time I remember seeing it like that, I was at my mom's apartment. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night and sat straight up before I even knew why. It was sitting on my dollhouse like it was a chair. It looked directly at me and grinned. I didn't scream. I was too confused and too scared. I just stared at it for a second, then slowly lay back down and pretended to sleep. I kept my eyes shut until real sleep finally took over. During my teens, I started thinking of it as my stalker. I didn't really tell people about it, not fully. It followed me everywhere, or at least it felt like it did. It stopped scaring me in the same way after a while. The feeling shifted, and I hate saying this, but sometimes it felt almost comforting, especially in that awful farmhouse where I often felt alone. I don't know how much of that was real, and how much was my mind trying to survive isolation. Maybe I gave it too much meaning because I needed something to cling to. Maybe it fed off that. I still don't know. The last major thing that happened with the hallway mirror was when I was 17. It was the middle of the day. I was walking through the house, nothing unusual, and while I was still in view of the mirror, I suddenly felt this sharp pain in my chest. It felt like something had pierced straight through me. I dropped to my knees because breathing hurt so badly. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Years later, after getting sick, I developed chest inflammation that causes pain in that exact same spot. Maybe it's coincidence. I hope it is. But whenever cold air makes that pain flare up, I remember that moment in the hallway. When I turned 18, I left that house. But the thing didn't leave me right away. For a few more years, I still felt it around. I started emotionally pulling away from it because deep down, I knew it wasn't good for me. Eventually, when I got into a real relationship with a living person, it seemed to lose its grip. Not quietly, though. There were still little incidents. Once, I bent down to pick something up and felt a hand grab me from behind, even though nobody was there. When I talked to my boyfriend on the phone, the call would sometimes cut out, and when it came back, he'd ask if I had heard that awful screeching or roaring sound. I never told him the whole story. I only gave him pieces. And now, honestly, I'm glad it's gone. I haven't dealt with it in years. I still think about that mirror sometimes, that long hallway, those footsteps, The way my reflection never felt like it belonged to me when I looked too long. But whatever followed me from that place, it finally let go. I'm 42 now, but there's one night from when I was little that I still remember with frightening clarity. I must have been about 4 years old, and my younger brother Jame was around 2. We shared a bedroom back then, each of us in our own twin bed. His sheets had spaceships and little movie characters all over them, and mine were bright and cheerful, covered in rainbow colors and cartoon faces. It was the kind of room that should have felt safe. Our beds were lined up beside each other, both facing this tall closet across the room. The closet was long, but not very deep, and the bedroom door was just to the left of it. I was lying in bed playing with my little berry-scented doll when I heard my brother start to whimper. It was quiet at first, this soft, muffled crying from the bed to my right. Even at that age, I was a little mother hen. Without even looking over, I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer with words, he just sobbed. So I put my doll down and started walking toward him. I remember being halfway between our beds when he lifted one tiny shaking finger and pointed at the closet. Then he buried his face and started crying harder, really crying, like something had scared him beyond anything he knew how to explain. I stopped where I was and looked where he was pointing, and what I saw has stayed with me my whole life. There, inside our closet, was a figure. The only way I can describe it is a tall, man-shaped absence of light. It was huge, easily over 6.5 feet tall, maybe taller, and it looked like it was wearing some kind of long coat that hung down past its knees. On its head was a small, rounded hat, almost like something from an old western. There were no details, no fabric, no skin, no features, just the outline. But the face was different. Where its eyes and mouth should have been, there were these swirling colors, almost like heat waves or energy moving in circles. The place where its mouth should have been was stretched wide open, like it was screaming at us with everything it had. But there was no sound. None. Looking back now, I also realized there was a shelf built into the top of that closet, and this thing was standing right through it. Not in front of it, through it. There was no normal way for anything that tall to be standing there. But that wasn't even the worst part. Down near its right knee, crouched low on the floor, was something else. Another creature. The moment I saw it, I lost control of my bladder. I just stood there and wet myself completely. I was so terrified I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe properly. I was frozen in the middle of our bedroom, soaked and shaking, staring at this thing. It was smaller than the tall figure, but still shaped almost like a person. Only it was wrong, more animal than human. It was down on all fours, tense, like it was about to sprint straight at me. And the taller one seemed to be holding it back. That's the feeling I got. Like the tall shadow had brought it there. Like someone holding back a dog on a leash. My brother was screaming by then, and I guess our parents heard him because suddenly they came rushing in. I remember each of them picking one of us up, trying to calm us down. At first, I still couldn't make a sound, but once my voice came back, I screamed. I mean, really screamed. The kind of scream that doesn't sound like it could come from a child. My dad was holding me, and I remember pressing into him thinking he would make everything okay. I can still remember the smell of his cold leather jacket. It was the early 80s, and he rode motorcycles, so that smell was always around him. But his back was facing the closet, and when I looked over his shoulder, I could still see the tall man standing there, with those swirling eyes and that wide, silent, screaming mouth. I tried to show them. My brother tried too. We both pointed. We both cried. but our parents couldn't see anything. That night, my dad slept in our room because we absolutely refused to sleep without him there. A couple of years later, we moved to a different state, and I thought maybe whatever that was had been left behind. It hadn't. The same figure came back, only this time, there were no swirling colors in its face, no strange eyes, no screaming mouth. It was just pure darkness in the shape of a man. And for years, it terrorized me. Sometimes it would stand in the corner of my room while I lay in bed, watching me. Sometimes it would glide down the hallway past my door and turn its head toward me as it went by. Other times, it would peek around my doorway from up near the ceiling, as if it were lying flat above the doorframe. I would see its head and that hat slowly appear from the top corner, then slide back out of sight. I know how strange that sounds. I know. But I was there. I was a child, and I was terrified almost every night. I started having horrible nightmares, though calling them nightmares feels too small. They were more like night terrors, and I truly believed this thing caused them. One of the worst ones was of that figure using a meat hook on my sister and hanging her from the bathroom door. Another dream had these little hooded beings crawling out of a hole beneath a huge live oak tree in our backyard, catching cats and eating them. My childhood was full of fear in a way I still don't fully know how to talk about. And before anyone asks, I wasn't allowed to watch scary movies. I only watched cartoons and gentle kids shows. Nothing that would have put images like that in my head, at least not that I can remember. Nobody really believed me. Nobody except my brother. And this might sound odd, but I gave the tall shadow man a name. I called him Cotterhead. I don't know why. I don't remember deciding it. That was just his name to me. Every night, I would cry and beg my dad not to make me go to bed. I would tell him, Cotterhead is going to come. And every night he would say, it's just a dream. But I knew it wasn't. I want to tell you a few stories my grandmother used to share with me, and I can still hear the way she told them. She grew up in Arkansas, in a little place tucked into the river valley, down near the foot of the Ozarks. The kind of place where everybody knew the land, and the land seemed to know everybody right back. She always said these things happened. Not maybe, not could have been. She swore they were true. The first thing she used to talk about was from when she was a girl picking cotton. A lot of families in the South have stories like that. Grandparents or great-grandparents working those long, hot rows. She said that sometimes, while the kids were out in the fields, they'd see a big black cat standing near the edge of the tree line. Not a house cat. Not anything ordinary. It would just watch them. Her daddy would take a shot at it now and then, but he never hit it. The thing would bolt off into the brush, and later that night, they'd hear it scream somewhere out in the dark. My grandmother always said it sounded just like a woman screaming. I never knew what to make of that story, but years later, in 2021, my family and I were driving through that same general part of Arkansas when something large and black crossed the road right in front of us. We all saw it. It moved low and smooth, and then it was gone. I still don't know what it was. Another story she told was about a hill everyone called Iron Ridge Mountain out near Keglesville. Around there, people call them mountains even though most folks would probably call them hills. That was just the way it was. My great-grandfather, whose name was Jack Grayson, was riding horses up there one day with a friend. As they came down a slope, he saw what he described as a ball of fire burst out of the ground and fly right under his friend's horse. Jack hollered for him to look out, but his friend hadn't seen a thing. That night, Jack went home and told my grandmother what happened. She said she knew right then that something bad was coming. About a week later, that friend died in an accident at a sawmill. Now, maybe that was coincidence. Maybe it was just one of those strange things people remember because of what came after. But my grandmother never told it that way. To her, that fire was a warning. There was another time on Iron Ridge when my grandparents had been out cutting firewood. They were heading back down a muddy dirt road, still a few miles from the main highway, when they came up on what looked like a log stretched across the road. My grandmother said it was thick, maybe as wide around as a fence post. My grandfather got out of the truck to move it, and then the log moved on its own. It was a snake. A huge one. She always said it must have been close to 30 feet long. It just slid across the road, slow and calm, not bothering anybody, like it owned that whole patch of earth. And that was the part that troubled her most. Arkansas doesn't have snakes like that. At least, it's not supposed to. Then there was the house near Hector. When my mother was born, my grandparents moved into a small place just outside town. Almost every morning, they'd wake up and find the front door standing open. At night, the bathroom faucet would turn on by itself, and in the morning, there would be wet footprints leading from the bathroom toward the door. They never heard chains rattling, never saw shadows floating around. Nothing dramatic like that. Just the open door, the running water, the footprints. Years later, my mother said a neighbor told her an old woman had lived in that house before them, and people around there had called her a witch. Whether that meant anything or not, I don't know. But nobody in my family ever forgot that house. The last story was about my grandmother's sister, Lenora. Lenora was married to a man named Carl, and they'd been together for more than 30 years. They lived up in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. At some point, an older woman moved into the house across the street. Lenora said from the beginning that something about that woman didn't sit right with her. She couldn't explain it, just a feeling. After a while, Carl started spending more and more time over there. Then Lenora's health began to fail. In the family, people whispered that the woman across the street was a witch and had put something on Lenora so she could take Carl for herself. Lenora eventually passed away. Not long after that, Carl moved in with the woman across the street. They were together for maybe a month and a half. Then one morning, Carl was found dead out in the yard. They said it looked like a heart attack. After he died, the woman wouldn't let any of the family come inside to collect his things. She boxed up what she wanted to give back and left it for them on the porch. The relatives who went to pick it up said the house felt awful from the outside, heavy and wrong somehow. They said the inside looked dark, with hardly any sunlight coming through. Now, I know that story could be explained without anything supernatural at all. People can be cruel. People can betray each other. Sometimes that's enough horror all by itself. But the older folks in my family never saw it that simply. To them, something was wrong there. And when my grandmother told these stories, she never told them to scare me for fun. She told them like she was passing along a little piece of the world as she understood it. A world where the woods had eyes, fire could rise from the ground, and some houses kept breathing long after everyone inside them was gone. I work as the maintenance manager at a large 55-plus apartment community. We've got a little over 800 apartments here, so over the years, I've seen a lot. It's not unusual for me to get called for a welfare check or to go in for a regular service call and find that someone has passed away. It's sad, but in a place like this, it happens. My mornings usually start around 6. I park my truck, grab my coffee and lunch, and walk over to the main fire gates where my work cart is kept. On the way, I wave to the early risers, say good morning, make a little small talk. That part of the day is usually calm. That Monday morning, while I was doing my usual walk-in, I noticed a man standing near the fire gate. He looked younger than most of the residents, maybe mid-40s or so. He was wearing a faded red shirt and blue jeans. He had this distant look about him, almost like he was lost or trying to remember where he was supposed to be. Around here, that doesn't immediately set off alarm bells. Some folks wander, some are waiting for rides, some just like standing outside in the quiet. So I tipped my hat and said, "Good morning." The man looked at me like I had startled him badly. Not scared exactly, but shocked, like I had done something I wasn't supposed to do. He didn't answer. I kept walking because, honestly, that still wasn't too strange for this place. Some residents keep to themselves. Some are in their own little world. I got to my cart, and when I looked back toward the fire gate, he was still there. He glanced over his shoulder at me with that same strange expression. I nodded to him again. He turned his eyes back toward the gate. Something about it felt odd, but not odd enough for me to stop everything. I just figured he was confused, maybe dealing with dementia, maybe waiting for someone. The next morning, Tuesday, I saw him again. Same place, same time, same red shirt, same jeans. This time he was standing in the middle of the main parking lot entrance, just still as a post. I called out, "Morning, you doing all right?" He didn't turn around fully. He just looked over his shoulder at me. And there it was again, that look. Like I had offended him somehow, but also like he didn't understand what I was doing there. His face was confused, almost irritated. I told myself not to overthink it. Around here, you learn that people have their routines, their habits, and sometimes their own storms going on inside them. Later that afternoon, around 2:30, I got called for a welfare check at an apartment near the fire lane, close to where I had seen that man. When I got to the door, I noticed Meals on Wheels had left 2 missed meal notices hanging there. 2 days' worth. That's never a good sign, but it's not always the worst either. Sometimes people don't feel like eating. Sometimes they're in the hospital. Sometimes they just don't answer the door. But when we went inside, I saw him. The same man. He was lying in bed, and it was clear he had been gone for a while. Same face, same build, same man I had seen standing by the gate that morning. Later, when the coroner handed me the paperwork, I looked at the estimated time of death. It said late Sunday night or early Monday morning. I asked if that was right. The coroner looked at me and said he could be even more specific. The man had been wearing a health watch, and it recorded his time of death. Monday morning, 5:51 a.m. I just stood there for a second. Then I said, "No, I saw him this morning." The coroner didn't really know what to say to that. Neither did I. I still don't know exactly what I experienced. I don't know how to explain it in a way that makes sense. All I know is that I saw that man, clear as day, as real as anyone I've ever spoken to. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe his sister. Maybe whoever he thought would come looking for him. Maybe he was standing by that fire gate because some part of him knew that was where help would pass by. I don't know. But after I left work and everything started fitting together, it hit me hard. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The clothes, the time, the way he looked at me, the place where he stood. And when it finally landed, it scared me so badly I had a panic attack. I've found people before. I've dealt with death before. But this was different. Because this time, I'm almost certain I saw someone after they were already gone. I want to tell you about something that's been happening to me for a while now, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. Back in 2021, my family moved into this old trailer park. It's been around for a long time, since my stepdad, who's in his 50s now, was just a kid. He actually used to live there when he was younger. I moved in with them too, because I'm still living at home, and at the time, I was carrying a lot from my past. I was struggling pretty badly then, and I've only really started trying to get better this year. Before we even fully moved in, we were checking the place out. I remember standing there and looking down the hallway, and that's when I saw it for the first time. A pale, round face peeked out at me from behind the bathroom door. It was only there for a second, but I knew what I saw. Later that same year, during summer school, I started seeing the same figure again. For about 3 days straight, it kept showing up. I would be lying in my loft bed, and I'd see its head moving just above the edge of my blankets, like it was peeking over at me. I saw it staring at me from the darkness outside the house, too. There may have been another time, but honestly, some of it is blurry now. Then, a few months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months back, I saw it again. This time, it was behind me in the reflection of my TV. Same face, same shape, same feeling. I ended up naming it Vesper. A few nights ago, around 12:30 at night, I came out of my room to talk with my mom. She was sitting on the couch with a beer, and everyone else was asleep. My little brother was asleep. My little sister was asleep. My stepdad was asleep. It was just me and her in the living room. My mom and I love talking about paranormal stuff. I love hearing her stories, even when they scare me. There's this toy car we have under the coffee table. Its battery is low, so sometimes it makes noise, but not usually in a way that feels strange. That night, my mom was in the middle of telling me a story about my grandmother, who passed away. She was talking about how my grandma once saw this freakishly tall shadow figure wearing a hat, just a few nights after my mom had seen the same thing. My grandma thought it might have been Morley, my grandfather who died back in the 80s, I think. And right when my mom imitated my grandma saying, "Morley, is that you?" the toy car went off. I froze. My mom told me it had already gone off once about an hour before I came out of my room. We grabbed each other's hands and just stared at each other with this scared look. But I started laughing because that's what I do when I'm nervous. Then I said, "If that's you, Vesper, or whoever you are, do it again." And it did. Right after I said it, the toy car went off again. That car has never gone off twice in a row like that. Not ever. Since that night, everything has felt different. I've been having a harder time falling asleep, especially when the house gets completely silent. It's worse when I'm in my room or when I'm walking back down the hallway. That's where the feeling is strongest. And then, just last night, something else happened. It was around 11, and I was going to take a shower. I left my bedroom light on because I really don't like my room when it's dark. My parents were still awake, so the living room lights were on, and I could see where I was going. When I got out of the shower, I wrapped a towel around myself and turned the bathroom light off without thinking. I forgot my parents usually go to bed around that time, and when they do, they shut off the living room lights. So I stepped into the hallway, and it was pitch black. I turned to my right and opened my bedroom door. My light was off. So was my TV. But I know I left them both on. I had left my TV on purpose because I didn't want my room to be dark. I went inside, shut my door, locked it, and turned my light back on. I got dressed for bed, and then it really hit me. Someone, or something, had turned off both my light and my TV. My brother didn't do it. He was asleep. I asked my mom, and she said she didn't. My stepdad never goes into my room. My little sister was in bed, and she's only 2. I barely slept after that. I called my best friend at 1 in the morning and stayed on the phone until around 2 when she had to sleep. I tried to sleep too, but I couldn't. At one point, I checked the time, and it was 4:11 in the morning. I was exhausted. I finally fell asleep and woke up around 10 because my brother woke me up. Now I'm starting to dread nighttime. I hate admitting that, but I'm scared. I've seen shadow figures before, and lately I can't shake the feeling that one of them is near me. I know Vesper has been around, but I don't think Vesper is what I'm most afraid of. This feels like something else, something heavier. My stepdad even found scratches on himself after saying he didn't care if whatever was here didn't like him. I don't know what to do. I can't tell if I'm just paranoid or if something is really happening. But I feel watched constantly, all the time, especially in my room. There's this strange feeling in my gut that won't go away. I just want to know what this is because not knowing is making everything worse. Lately, I've been staying up until 2 in the morning and waking up early, sometimes around 6. I dream every night, and the dreams are always strange. I even had one where I moved into a house with 2 roommates I didn't know, and that house was haunted too. I've put salt in my room before, and it seemed to help for a while, at least until my room got vacuumed. But even now, I can feel it. That feeling of being stared at. I never feel fully alone, and I never really feel at peace. This happened just a couple of nights ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. I want to say this up front. I was completely sober. I hadn't been drinking, I don't use anything, and I wasn't exhausted or half asleep either. I was switching over to night shifts, so I was intentionally staying up through the night to keep my sleep schedule from getting wrecked. It was around 12:45 in the morning. I was sitting on the couch with my headphones on, listening to music, when I noticed something out of the corner of my right eye. I turned my head and saw this vague shape near the side of the room. It was pale beige and silvery gray, sort of blocky, almost person-shaped. But only for a split second. I blinked, maybe twice, and it was gone. The strange part was the feeling that came with it. It wasn't terrifying, it didn't feel evil or anything like that. But it also didn't feel welcoming. It felt more like disappointment, almost like I had missed something I was supposed to notice sooner. I tried not to overthink it. I told myself it was probably just my eyes playing tricks on me, and I went back to the music. Maybe 20 minutes later, one of our dogs, Milo, woke up. He had been sleeping on the couch across from me. He came over and started barking right beside me, which wasn't too strange by itself. Sometimes he wants to go outside at weird hours if he sees that one of us is still awake. So I got up, thinking I'd let him out. But instead of heading toward the door, Milo walked straight toward the exact spot where I had seen that weird shape. Then he stopped, turned, and looked at me. I called him back and told him to come on, but he just stared at me like he wanted me to follow him. I got irritated and told him to knock it off. Then, just like that, he went back to the couch, curled up, and fell asleep almost immediately. It was odd, but I let it go. A little after 3 in the morning, I got really thirsty. I took my headphones off and went upstairs to get some water. As I got near the kitchen, I heard a noise. When I walked in, our other dog Baxter came out from near the counters. Now, Baxter has a habit of sneaking into the kitchen and trying to lick plates or sniff around for food. So at first, I figured that was all he was doing. He's not supposed to be in there at night, so I shooed him toward the bedroom, where my wife was sleeping. Then I heard the cat meowing. We have a cat who usually stays in the kitchen at night, and she always meows when someone comes in, so that part wasn't unusual. But this meow sounded wrong. It was coming from low to the floor, and it had this frightened little edge to it. I looked down and saw her lying on a towel. Her eyes were huge, completely panicked. When I moved closer, she started growling. At first, I thought maybe the dog had startled her. I spoke gently to her, tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't move. I nudged her softly near her back end, just enough to see if she could get up. She took a few shaky steps and stopped. That's when I saw a puncture wound near her back thigh. I woke my wife and she checked her over more carefully. She found another puncture wound on the other side. From what we could tell, Baxter had bitten her, and I had walked in right before things could get worse. She's still sore and not moving her back legs much, but she does seem to be improving. The part that really bothers me is how out of character it was. We've had Baxter for over a year, and the cat has been with us even longer. He follows her around sometimes, sure, but he has never tried to hurt her. He even sleeps near our other cat without any issue. Milo, the dog who had been downstairs with me, has absolutely no interest in cats at all. So it wasn't just strange, it was completely abnormal. By the time we got the cat settled and everything calmed down, it was close to 4 in the morning. I went back downstairs, but I couldn't focus on the music anymore. I just kept thinking about the cat, the shape I had seen, and Milo staring toward that spot. Eventually, around 5:30, I went to bed. That's when I had this strange early sleep dream. I was standing in front of a mirror. There was nothing around it, no room, no background, no real light source, but I could see the reflection perfectly. And in the mirror, I saw myself, but younger, healthier, better looking, honestly. The image was unbelievably clear. I remember saying, "Yeah, that's me," and I reached out to touch the reflection. Right before my fingers made contact, I jolted awake so hard it felt like my whole body snapped back into place. After that, I just lay there, wide awake. I tried to fall back asleep, but it took hours. If it had only been one strange thing, I'd probably brush it off. Even 2 things, maybe. But 4 separate things happening in the same stretch of night feels harder to ignore. The shape in the room, Milo reacting to that exact spot, Baxter suddenly attacking the cat completely out of character, then that vivid mirror dream. I don't know whether it was coincidence, stress, something paranormal, or just a weird chain of events that my brain is trying to connect. But I can't shake the feeling that something passed through my house that night, and for whatever reason, I noticed just enough of it to be left wondering. I live out in a rural part of Eastern Europe, one of those places where every village feels like it was scattered by hand across the fields. You get a few houses, a church tower, maybe a little shop, and then nothing but dark roads, farmland, and silence until the next town. And lately, I've started to wonder if something strange is moving around out here. I work for a company not far from home. I'm not going to name it because that part doesn't really matter. What matters is that I usually work the late shift, from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night. During those shifts, I've gotten into the habit of walking to the nearest village shop when the food at work doesn't look good, or when I just need a little break from staring at the same office walls. It's not a long walk, but in winter, it means crossing a stretch of road after dark. My workplace sits right on the edge of town. There's a lamp at the entrance gate, and then another one near the first houses in the village. But between them, there's this strip of road, maybe 250 meters, with no lights at all. Just road, ditch, mud, and open field. On cloudy nights, it gets so dark there that the world seems to fold itself shut. I never used to mind it. I'm not someone who scares easily in the dark, and the animals around here are usually harmless. Deer, foxes, the occasional wild boar, but nothing that normally comes looking for trouble. Honestly, I used to enjoy that little walk. The cold air, the quiet, the way the road disappeared ahead of me. It felt peaceful in a lonely sort of way. That changed in February. I had left work like usual, heading toward the shop. The sky was completely overcast, so there wasn't even moonlight to help me. I could barely see where the asphalt ended. I had to keep checking my footing by the feel of mud under one shoe. About halfway through that dark stretch, I heard hooves. Not far away either. They were right beside me, matching my pace from somewhere in the field. At first, I told myself it had to be a deer, maybe a boar, something ordinary. But the sound was too steady, too close, and animals here usually move away from people, not alongside them. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made myself loud. I stomped harder, coughed, scraped my shoes against the road, hoping whatever it was would get spooked and leave. For a few seconds, the hooves kept following me. Then, just before I reached the next lamp, the sound faded off into the field. I never saw what made it. That was unsettling, but I could still explain it away. Animals behave strangely sometimes. Maybe it was confused. Maybe the darkness made it seem closer than it was. But on the way back, it happened again. This time, I was walking on the opposite side of the road, carrying my snacks, trying not to think too much about what I'd heard earlier. Then those same hoofbeats started up again, now on my left. Same rhythm, same distance, just out of sight. I stomped again, louder this time. And then it spoke. At least, I think it spoke. It sounded like a man's voice right beside me in the black field, repeating one nonsense word over and over. I couldn't make out what it was. It wasn't a language I recognized. It rose and fell in pitch, almost playful at moments, then flat and low, then high again. The hoofbeats kept going underneath it. That was when every calm, rational thought in my head packed its little suitcase and left. I ran. I didn't look back. I just sprinted for the company gate, straight toward the light. By the time I reached it and turned around, there was nothing there. No person, no animal, no movement in the field. Just darkness. For months, I convinced myself it had to have been someone messing with me. That's the cleanest explanation, isn't it? A person hiding in a field, making hoof sounds and talking nonsense. But the more I think about it, the less sense that makes. It was freezing, empty, and completely dark. There was no reason for anyone to be standing out there, waiting for me specifically. Still, I stopped walking that road after sunset. Then something else happened this week. A coworker, Merrick, dropped me off near my house after a late shift. From there, I have to walk a little dirt path to reach my gate. It was a bright night, the kind where the sky glows enough that rooftops cut sharp black shapes against it. As I walked, I noticed one of the houses nearby had an unusually tall chimney. I mean really tall. Too tall. It rose way above the roofline, thin and dark against the sky. I actually stopped for a second because I didn't remember any of my neighbors having a chimney like that. But I was tired, so I told myself I'd just never noticed it before. The next night, I came home the same way. The sky was just as bright, and I looked at that same roof again. There was no chimney. Not a short one, not a broken one, nothing in that spot at all. Just the clean slope of the roof against the night sky. So now I don't know what to think. Maybe there's a rational explanation for both things. Maybe the hoofbeats were an animal, and the voice was some weird echo from the road. Maybe the chimney was a branch, or a shadow, or my tired brain stitching shapes together in the dark. I'd really like to believe that. But out here, when the fields go quiet and the roads lose their edges, it's hard not to feel like something is walking just beyond the light, keeping pace. I had the strangest dream, and it felt so vivid that I'm still carrying pieces of it around with me. In the dream, I woke up, or at least I became aware, at what looked like an old filming location. I don't know what it was supposed to be for. A movie? A show? Something abandoned, maybe. The only way in was across this narrow covered bridge, just one lane wide, with a faded red exterior. Past the bridge, there was a gravel road. It was daytime, quiet. Nothing felt wrong yet. But after I crossed over, I saw a group of kids walking back toward the bridge, maybe around early high school age. They looked like they were leaving. When they got close to me, though, they didn't say anything. They just turned off into the tall grass beside the road and kept walking until I couldn't see them anymore. Then they were gone. Not in the usual dream way where something disappears because the scene changes. They disappeared because they went out of sight, and somehow that felt much worse. It felt deliberate. I was still standing there trying to make sense of it when a man I'd never seen before walked up beside me and said, very calmly, "No, they're all right." And then, just like that, I was inside a house. Now it was nighttime. The same kids were there too, sitting around this big room. It might have been a living room, or maybe a study. There was furniture, but no beds. The strange part was that they were talking to me like they knew me, even though I had no idea who any of them were. The man from outside wasn't there anymore. And I need to explain something about him, because this is one of the parts that really unsettled me. In my dreams, if I meet someone I don't actually know, their face is usually vague, blurry. Sometimes I can't remember anything about them afterward. But this man had a face, a clear one. I could still describe him now. If I could draw, I think I could sketch him. Anyway, we were all in this room, and then the temperature dropped. Not just a little. It became deeply cold, like the whole house had suddenly exhaled winter. Then there was this pressure. It wasn't exactly a sound, but it felt like one. Almost like when your ears pop while driving up or down a mountain, except I could feel it through my whole body. Then, black smoke started seeping out from under the furniture. At first, it came slowly, thin little strands curling across the floor. Then it thickened. The room got colder. I started hearing voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. And then the scene shifted. We were in another house, going through the same thing again. This time, the smoke came from a closet door right beside us. I tried to hold the door shut, but whatever was behind it forced it open. Everyone ran. I tried to get out too, but there didn't seem to be an exit anywhere. No front door, no back door, nothing that made sense. So I panicked and hid behind a door in one of the rooms, which, looking back, was about as useful as hiding from the ocean behind a paper plate. The smoke came into the room. Then that same man from before stepped out of it, or at least I think he did. I couldn't see everything from where I was crouched behind the door, but he came around into view, looked straight at me, and said, "Well, that wasn't very clever, was it?" Then he grabbed my arm. It hurt. Not like a normal grab. It felt sharp, almost like little knives digging into my skin. And suddenly, we were outside again. Daylight. There were buses parked nearby, and a crowd of random people milling around like we were at some kind of tour stop. Then the same kids walked toward one of the buses, but the second they reached the doors, they vanished. The man looked at me and said, "You really shouldn't come back here." Then I woke up with my heart pounding. The strangest part is that my left forearm still hurt. I was wrapped up in a comforter and the rest of me was overheated, but that spot on my arm felt cold and stinging, exactly where he had grabbed me in the dream. That's why I can't quite shake it. Maybe it was just a weird dream. Maybe my brain put together smoke, old houses, a red bridge, and some stranger with a face too clear to forget. But between how real it felt, the kids vanishing the same way twice, the black smoke, the man warning me not to come back, and that leftover pain in my arm after I woke up, I don't know. It felt like something more than a dream. About 13 years ago, when I was 14, my family and I were living in this old house in Mount Clemens, Michigan. The first thing that happened was actually something my stepmom heard. She was home alone with my little sister, who was 4 at the time, and my sister was asleep upstairs. Out of nowhere, my stepmom heard a baby crying. Not just a little sound either. She was sure it was coming from upstairs. But there was no baby in the house. After that, things just kept happening. Over the 10 years we lived there, pretty much everyone in the family saw her at least once. A woman in white with long black hair. She usually showed up in the master bedroom upstairs or right at the top of the stairs. And from the living room couch, you could see that spot clearly. So sometimes you would just be sitting there, watching TV or talking, and there she'd be. The strange part is, back then, she never felt evil. I know that sounds odd, but it's true. None of us felt threatened. It was more like we all understood she was there, the same way you know the weather has changed before you look outside. She was just part of the house. Then about 5 years ago, I moved out with my girlfriend at the time. My family stayed in that house for a few more years after I left. And somehow, she came with me. At first, it felt the same. I would sense her around. Sometimes I'd see her. Still, nothing about it felt dangerous, just familiar. But then she started showing up in my dreams. In the beginning, even that wasn't bad. She would just be there, somewhere in the dream, not doing anything. But over time, something changed. The feeling around her became different, heavier, wrong. Instead of just appearing, she started following me, and it felt like she wanted me to be afraid. About a year ago, I had the first dream that really shook me. In the dream, I was at some kind of haunted attraction, like a scare park, with a few friends. One of them, Elias, had actually seen the woman in real life before, back at the old house. He was so unsettled by it that he refused to ever stay there again. In the dream, we were walking around, trying to decide what to do, when Elias nudged me and said, "She's watching you. She's following us." I remember telling him, "Just ignore her. Keep walking." But she kept getting closer. Then I had this stupid thought. I thought, this time I'm going to scare her before she scares me. I know, bad idea. She stopped following us, and I told Elias, "Now's my chance." I tried to sneak up on her. I ran toward her, reaching out like I was going to grab her. But right before my hands touched her, she turned around faster than anything I've ever seen. She had the worst smile on her face. Not a normal smile, not human, just this awful, knowing grin. Then she grabbed me. She lifted me straight up into the air while staring into my eyes, still smiling. It felt like I was falling upward, like the sky had turned into a trap door. I woke up screaming and gasping for air. After that, everything seemed to stop for a while. I didn't see her. I didn't feel her. I honestly thought maybe I was finally free of it. Until 2 nights ago. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment out in the country now with my girlfriend and her kids. That night was really warm, and I was having a hard time falling asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, my girlfriend woke up because she heard what sounded like a baby crying. But she said it didn't sound like a normal cry. She said it sounded like a baby in pain, like something terrible was happening to it. Her kids are all older, so there's no way it was them. Still, she got up and ran into their room to check on them. They were all asleep. But while she was standing there in their room, she could still hear the crying. She said it sounded like it was right there with her. Then she came back into our room to tell me the kids were okay. And this is the part that bothers me. She said I smiled at her, rolled over, and went back to sleep. I have no memory of that. None. I've tried to remember it. I've gone over it again and again. She even told me what was on the TV at the time, little details that should have helped jog something loose in my head. But there's nothing there. That same night, within about an hour of her hearing the baby, the woman came back in my dream. I don't remember most of the dream, but I remember the ending perfectly. I was getting into my car. I jumped into the driver's seat, and when I looked into the driver's side mirror to back up, she was there, in the mirror, looking straight at me. Same black hair, same white clothes, same awful smile. And for some reason, I reached out for her again. The second I did, I started choking. I couldn't breathe at all. It felt like hands were around my throat, or like I'd been held underwater too long. Then I woke up gasping so loudly that I woke my girlfriend. I spent the next morning trying to look into it, trying to find anything that might explain what's been happening. But I keep coming up short. I don't feel like I'm losing my mind. That's the hard part. Other people have seen her. People who had no reason to lie. People who still believe, firmly, that what they saw in that house was real. What I can't understand is why she stayed with me. Why, after all these years, did she follow me? And why does it feel like whatever she wants from me has changed? I think this all started when I was around 11. I found this old mirror at a church rummage sale. It was free, and at that age, free felt exciting. I brought it home and hung it on my bedroom closet door, not thinking anything of it. But almost right away, my sleep changed. I started having sleep paralysis. Then the nightmares came. It was always this woman in white. She looked ruined somehow, like her body had been torn open, and I could see things hanging from her stomach. I know how awful that sounds, but that's what I saw. And I was so young. I didn't have the words for it. I just knew I was terrified. I got to the point where I wouldn't sleep alone. I either slept in my parents' room, or I begged someone to stay in my room with me. The only person who seemed to believe me was my grandfather, Martin, who was living with us then. He had a drinking problem, so when he said he believed me, it didn't exactly make me feel safer. It just made everything feel stranger. While we were in that apartment, my mom and I both heard things. Banging, scratching, whispering from places where nobody was standing. But my mom was struggling with addiction at the time, so even though she heard it too, I still felt like no one would take us seriously. Around then, I also messed with a Ouija board once. Nothing dramatic happened that I can remember, but I've always wondered if that mattered somehow. I started sleepwalking too. Not just wandering around my room either. I would try to walk toward the stairs outside our apartment. It happened so often that my parents put a baby gate in my doorway and another one near the kitchen, just to keep me from getting out while I was asleep. My dad worked away from home a lot, usually gone for several days at a time, so most of this was just me and my mom trying to pretend things were normal. Eventually, we moved far away, to another state. We stayed with my aunt, her husband, my cousin, and my grandfather. Nothing huge happened there, except for more sleep paralysis now and then. For a while, I thought maybe whatever it was had stayed behind. Then we moved into the apartment we're in now, and for a while things were calm. But then, my mom brought her old childhood dresser out of storage. She told me that when she was younger and had that dresser in her room, she used to see this tall, dark, threatening male figure near it. She described it like a shadow with a presence, heavy, angry, watching. I didn't believe her, not really. I used the dresser for a while, and nothing happened at first. Then we went away on vacation for about a week. When we came back, the heads had been broken off our Mother Mary statues outside. There were also fresh white flowers left near them. We tried to explain it away. Maybe a neighbor had knocked them over and felt bad. Maybe the flowers were an apology. We buried the broken statue in the backyard and placed the flowers over it. A couple weeks later, during quarantine, I got bored and decided to sand and repaint the dresser. Less than a week after that, I had a cross hanging from one of the handles, and it flew off so hard that it hit my wall and knocked a painting down. That's when I started feeling like maybe my mom had been telling the truth. Another weird thing happened around that time. We had a roommate then, and one evening my mom and I both saw him walk downstairs and go out the front door. A few minutes later, we called him to ask what he wanted for dinner, and he came out of his bedroom, confused, like he had never left at all. We both saw him leave, both of us. After that, it became smaller things, but still unsettling. Bruises I couldn't explain, scratches, the occasional burn. Nothing life-threatening, but enough that I couldn't ignore it. Then my mom passed away from a drug overdose in late 2021, right when I was starting my freshman year of high school. After that, I was destroyed. I was depressed in a way I still don't fully know how to explain. I've heard people say dark things feed off negative energy, and if that's true, then I must have looked like a feast. I got rid of the dresser because it reminded me too much of my mom. But after that, I became terrified of my closet. It would open on its own, so I started putting things in front of it. I had nightmares about it. Sleep paralysis too. I'd hear scratching from inside, and sometimes the doorknob would rattle. For a while, I couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. Now I use the closet again, and thankfully nothing has happened with it lately. A few months ago, a friend of mine cleansed my room. He's sensitive to that kind of thing, and he had told me before that he wouldn't sleep over because there was something dark in my house. After he cleansed it, things did feel lighter for a while. But this morning, I woke up with a burn on the inside of my arm. It was bad enough to blister. That scared me all over again. I'm usually home with my little brother and my dog, and I don't know what I'd do if something happened to them. My boyfriend stays over sometimes, and he's never experienced anything, which almost makes me feel even more alone in it. I don't know what this is. I don't even fully believe I'm asking for help like this, but I don't know what else to do anymore. Moving didn't stop it. Cleansing helped, but only for a little while. The only person who really experienced any of this with me was my mom, and she's gone now. Most people don't believe me. Sometimes I barely believe myself. I just know I'm scared, and I don't want to feel alone with it anymore. I've got an 18-month-old little boy, and even though he has his own bedroom, we don't actually sleep in there right now. His bed is a little too high for my comfort, and I'm always worried that if he wakes up before I do, he might try to climb down and hurt himself. Our other spare room is being used as an office, so there isn't really another bed option. And since I'm still breastfeeding, and he usually wakes up at least once during the night, it's honestly just easier for us to sleep near each other. So I've made the living room into kind of a safe little sleep setup for us. He has his play area gated off with a playpen, and I put a mattress on the floor with pillows around it, just in case he wakes before me. That way I know he's safe. My husband works very early in the morning, so he sleeps in the main bedroom. Our 3 dogs usually sleep in there with him, right on the bed, just like they did before our son was born. We didn't want to change their whole routine too much after the baby came. I should also mention that our dogs are big, and I'm very firm about not leaving kids and dogs alone together before a certain age. So because of that, we all kind of sleep in separate areas of the house. The dogs can still roam around if they want to. Sometimes they'll rest in the dining area, sometimes by the entrance, sometimes in the hallway. It just depends on what they feel like doing. So that's the layout. A few nights ago, everyone was settled in their usual spots. My son was asleep beside me, my husband was in the bedroom, and the dogs were with him. I was still awake, doing some homework on my tablet. I didn't have any lights on because I didn't want to wake my son. Then, out of nowhere, the hallway light turned on. It was the hallway that leads toward the main bedroom, so my first thought was that it had to be my husband. That was the only thing that made sense. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. So I got up to check, wondering why he was awake at 2 or 3 in the morning. But when I looked into the bedroom, my husband was completely asleep. The dogs were asleep too. All of them were out cold. Nobody was up. I turned the hallway light off and went back to the living room. I checked on my son, who was still sleeping peacefully right next to me, and I just tried to shrug it off. I didn't want to think too hard about it. But then tonight, just a little while ago, it happened again. I was getting ready to rest and putting on some soft classical music on my tablet. That's when I noticed that the light in my son's bedroom was suddenly on. And I know for a fact I had turned every light off before putting him to bed. I always do. He cannot sleep if there's even the tiniest bit of light in the room. So when I saw that glow coming from his room, I felt my stomach drop a little. I went to check, thinking maybe my husband had gone in there, or maybe one of the dogs had somehow gotten through. But no one was in the room. The baby gates were all still where they should be, and the light was coming from this standing lamp in his room. The weirdest part is that the lamp hasn't even worked in weeks. We don't have smart bulbs or anything fancy. They're just regular lights. And no, our dogs don't know how to turn on lamps. I also would have heard their nails clicking on the tile if they had walked through the house. What really unsettled me is that the dogs didn't react at all. No barking, no getting up, not even a little flinch. They just kept resting like nothing happened. I know this might sound silly, and maybe I'm just scaring myself. Before my son was born, I used to watch a lot of horror movies, listen to creepy podcasts, and I even collected horror-themed stuff. After he was born, I just kind of stepped away from all of that without really meaning to. Lately, though, I've been watching Evil on Netflix, so part of me wonders if my brain is just turning every little thing into something spooky. But the lights turning on by themselves? That part is hard for me to explain. And it's not the only odd thing. There have been nights where I swear I hear someone calling for me, but when I look around, no one is there. At first, I told myself it was probably just like those phantom baby cries you hear when you have a newborn. Then earlier today, I was on FaceTime with my mom. It was just me and my son in the room, and the dogs were asleep. My husband wasn't there. But my mom suddenly said she clearly heard my husband's voice say something to me. Except he wasn't anywhere near us. The strange things almost always seem to happen near the entrance of the house. When you walk in, my son's room is on the right, the office and guest bathroom are on the left, and the hallway goes straight back toward the main bedroom. I keep trying to explain it away. But these lights keep turning on. And honestly, it's starting to make me feel like something in this house is trying to get my attention.